I don't think my whistle's working. I think my whistle is broken. Anybody know how to fix the whistle? Now that I have your attention, I'm going to do some. Hello? I can do that, but whoever did that, thank you. All right, it's time to be in church. Okay, I'm going to do some housekeeping chores. People are still wandering in. There are seats in the balcony, just so you know that.
I got everything, right, too?
I need to let you know, people are asking about Wi-Fi. I'm going to give you the password. I'm going to do it one time. Are you ready? It's Temple Wi-Fi 18. That's it. So simple. Okay, for those of you who want to tweet, something I have yet learned to do, but I can say hashtag, it's hashtag OakMTG, Oak Meeting. Sound familiar?
Louder, please.
Louder? You want to sit closer? All right, did you hear the Wi-Fi? You didn't hear that. I'll repeat it one more time. Temple Wi-Fi 18. Okay? Hashtags for tweeting, we have two. Hashtag Oak Meeting, Oak MTG, and Oak Mayor, each preceded by a hashtag. You can tell I don't know how to do that. That's fine. So let me do some other housekeeping. There are restrooms at the back of the auditorium, one on the left, one on the right. I think my left is men, my right is women. We'd ask you to share the seating, even though there is still seating upstairs. If you see a space between you and the next person, scoot over and be friends. We have seating in the front for the sponsoring organizations. I think there are still some seats available. See, when I get too close, it has a spitting sound. So I'm going to stand back a little way. Okay. So my next piece of housekeeping is, this debate is a public service program. The facility provider, Temple Sinai, and the co-sponsors, Make Oakland Better Now, and the Metropolitan Greater Oakland Democratic Club, have not endorsed any candidate, nor do they take any position with respect to any statements made or opinions given by the candidates during the debate. Are we ready? All right, now I'll say good evening to all of you. My name is Sheila Young. I owned a business in this town for more than 30 years. And I recently served as the mayor of the city of Oakland. Boy, wishful thinking? Not on your life. No, wishful thinking would be San Leandro with only 85,000 people. I was the mayor of San Leandro from 1998 through to 2007. I was asked to moderate this evening by the two sponsoring organizations, and I am delighted and honored to participate. I know most of the candidates, and I met two of them tonight, so now I can say that I've met them all, at least the ones who are here. Democracy is synonymous with freedom. In this country, we enjoy more options and choices than anywhere else in the world. Tonight, we meet to learn how the candidates for mayor of Oakland will work to protect those freedoms. The sponsoring organizations have chosen this forum to discuss in detail the single subject of public safety. We will begin with the introduction of our sponsors, the candidates, the panel. Then we'll move to questions by the panel, followed by questions between candidates, and end with a 1-minute closing by each candidate. We have allotted 2.5 hours for the debate. If it goes longer, it's their fault. We really would appreciate the audience holding your applause unless I ask you to applaud. So like that would be for me or the sponsoring groups. So let me introduce Make Oakland Better Now. It is a grassroots group of citywide voters committed to improving the city of Oakland. Their principal focus at this forum is ensuring public safety with transparency and accountability in city government. I'd now like to introduce the board chair, Bruce Nye. Stand up, Bruce. Now you can applaud. Our second sponsor tonight is the Metropolitan Greater Oakland Democratic Club, known as MGO, also a grassroots democratic organization that has been involved in Oakland and policy and political issues for more than 55 years. The club meets throughout the year, puts on monthly programs related to local issues, and they're currently focusing on public safety. They recently presented a 7-month series that examined the issue of crime from a variety of perspectives. I'd now like to introduce their president, Gretchen White, who is over here. Thank you, Gretchen. In the interest of time and space, 9 candidates were invited this evening, and they drew lots for their seating arrangements. That's why you see them in this wonderful array. Ground rules have been shared with each of them, and they have agreed to abide by them, including respect for one another and for the process. The candidates will be introduced from stage right, your left. I encourage you to applaud the entire group, but not until I finish. Running for office is not for the faint of heart, and we should applaud the very fact that they have placed themselves in harm's way. I'm sure they'll all attest to that. Since they drew their lots, I don't have them arranged in lots, so when I introduce them, even though you know them, I'd like for them to just raise their hand and give a wave for the live streaming that we are doing tonight on YouTube. Jean Quan is the current directly elected mayor of Oakland and previously served on the Oakland Board of Education and the Oakland City Council. Thank you for not applauding, that was really good. Libby Schaff is a currently elected Oakland City Council member from District 4. She previously worked with Ignacio de la Fuente and former Mayor Jerry Brown. Courtney Ruby is the current elected Oakland City Auditor and was recently elected to her 2nd term. She is a CPA and a certified fraud examiner. She is a professor of political science at SF State University and has worked in television news and print media. Dan Siegel, don't make me blow my whistle. Dan Siegel is an attorney in private practice in Oakland, having previously worked in the San Francisco City Attorney's Office. He previously served as general counsel and then as an elected director of the Oakland Unified School Board. Brian Parker is an appointed Oakland Port Commissioner. He is a healthcare executive and past chair of the Oakland Workforce Investment Board. Nancy Sidebottom is an accountant. She has been a resident of Oakland since 1964 and has been actively involved with neighborhood crime prevention councils for over 17 years. Patrick McCullough, who I met this evening, is an attorney in private practice in Oakland for 14 years. He was previously a tech worker and union member for 25 years and a union steward for 10. And last, but certainly not least, Jason Shake Anderson. And if you ask me later, I'll tell you how I got his name. He won't be happy. Jason Anderson is a U.S. Navy veteran, an artist and activist and native of Oakland. He is the nominee of the Oakland Green Party and also served as an organizer for First Fridays. Following this introduction, if I refer to a candidate by name, I will only use Mr. or Ms. It is not a reflection or dishonor, simply in the interest of time. During the Q&A, we ask the audience to abide by several requests. No flash camera work. We are live streaming. No banners or signs inside the auditorium, sorry. The least disruption possible. Responses. This evening is Savannah Carnes. Savannah, raise your hand. She will be using signage to let the speakers know their time has elapsed. A yellow sign will be 15 seconds left, and the red sign means time has elapsed. Within a second or two, the candidate should stop. Each time there's a question, a different question time will be acknowledged, so they know, because some of the response times are different. And at the end of the evening, each candidate will have 1 minute to wrap up your final remarks. We are live streaming tonight, and it will be available on YouTube following this presentation as well. Our panel tonight, to my right, your left, down in the corner, is composed of the Bay Area media representatives, and all questions will be posed by them, with the exception of the first question, which will be asked by me. The opening question has been shared with the candidates so they could be prepared and ready to share a succinct response. I'm delighted to introduce Bianca Brooks from Youth Radio. That's good. You can do that. Matt, is Matt here? Did he make it? Did he find a place to park? Matt Arts, Oakland Tribune, couldn't find a place to park. Robert Gammon, East Bay Express. And Chip Johnson, San Francisco Chronicle. And on behalf of the sponsoring organizations, we'd really like to thank all of you, all of the panelists and the candidates themselves. To thank you all for coming and being on time. It shows a lot for what you'll do as mayor of Oakland. So is everybody ready? All right, here's the first question. Each candidate will have 2 minutes to respond. We'll start on my right, your left, with Courtney Ruby. Here's the question. What is your plan to make Oakland a safe city? How will you implement and pay for your plan? And how will we know when you have succeeded? Courtney?
Thank you. My name is Courtney Ruby, and here's what I know. We can't make Oakland safer until we fix Oakland's broken government. And to fix Oakland's broken government, we need to address the leadership deficit inside City Hall. Oakland has what it takes to rise to this challenge. We have a community that is clamoring to get involved in real solutions. We have a dedicated police force that risks their lives every day. And we have millions of dollars that is identified through fraud, waste, and abuse that we can apply towards public safety. I know because my office did an audit of OPD technology, and we found that the city wasted almost $2 million on technology never used or underused. What we don't have is leadership inside City Hall to pull it all together and make our city safer. As auditor, I look at the hard numbers, not excuses. I hire professionals and let them do their job. I lead a risk-based focus that's based on results, not politics. As mayor, I will lead the fight for public safety every day. I will hire a police chief, a good police chief, to get the job done, provide them the tools and resources. I will set benchmarks so that you, the public, as I have done as auditor, can measure our progress in real time. I will use the millions of dollars that we identify to put towards public safety first. And I want to reach beyond community policing to collaborative policing, which means that law enforcement and the community come together in real partnership and bring this together in a strategic plan that we implement. And it's the mayor's job to make sure that we implement and succeed in making this city safe. Tonight, I'm going to ask for your vote that I may make this city safer. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Ruby. I'm not going to prompt you each to speak. Just when the person is finished, please go right ahead.
Okay. Hello, my name is Jason Anderson, Green Party candidate, military veteran. And what I see in the city is a lot of dysfunction and a lot of lack of leadership, lack of direction. I've served in the military 7 years, and I have a clear understanding of what it takes to understand a large organization, what it takes at the ground level to talk to people face-to-face, one-on-one, interact, and also on the government level, being that I've been in large organizations and I can see clearly when there's a lack of leadership. The mayor's job is a spokesperson and a representation of the city, a person that represents the city completely, not just in the hills, but on the flatlands and throughout the city. It's not just about meeting with the same group and making the same deals, but actually providing deals for people that don't have the opportunity for those deals. Allow them to reach from the ground level, from East Oakland, to possibly have a house in the hills in East Oakland. So it's an imperative that the leadership of the city is addressed, and as we can see by the lack of the police chief or interim police chief, now interim city administrator, that means that the top level is not somebody that you would want to follow as a leader. And I believe that with proper leadership and a clear plan on how to hire the chief of police and the city administrator, which is a tough job. I mean, I have to say that the city is in very much trouble right now, and I think everybody understands that. If you don't have a clear chief of police and you don't have a city administrator, those are the two most important jobs, and right now we're failing at government. And I think that with new, fresh leadership, a fresh face, and a person that understands government from the military level would actually bring the leadership that the city needs. So thank you.
I prefer to stand if you don't mind. Good evening. My name is Joe Tuman, and I'm also running for mayor. The first part of the question asks, what is safety to me and how will I make the city safe? My direct answer to this question is to suggest that we need both a short-term and a long-term approach to solving crime. The short-term part of this involves staffing numbers for the police. In my administration, the goal will be to take an additional 300 officers net of attrition and bring our force up over 900 police officers. I say this not because we arrest our way to a solution, but simply because if you can't project a visible police force, you can't discourage bad choices and encourage good choices. I'm also about investing in social programs that are held to a metric of the outcome that I'm looking for. So if I invest in programs to reduce violence, then the way I evaluate those programs is to see if they actually reduce violence. And I would do that on a yearly basis, not every 3 years, the way we do it now. Now, the next question about this is the long-term solution. In order to solve the systemic causes of crime, you have to address poverty. So part of my answer tonight is to talk about, if you ask me follow-up questions, education, housing, and jobs production, and I have answers on that. How do I pay for that is the next part of this question, and very quickly I'll tell you it's through a blend of existing tax bases that we have that we're not leveraging right now. They include retail taxes, sales tax in other words, hotel taxes, the room rate tax that we have, and also attraction of new businesses to create new business license taxes. I want to grow revenue. The other way that you pay for this, at least on the police side, is to continue to contain the cost of policing by improving civilianization of existing jobs that can be civilianized and going to third-tier hires for new cadets if necessary. The last part of the question was, how will you know when it works? How will you know when you're safe? And the answer to that is not in looking at data year over year just for homicides, but to look at several years' worth of data across all crime categories to show meaningful reductions. You'll know it's safe then. You'll also know it's safe when we don't have to have a public forum that only talks about crime. You'll know it's safe when we don't have neighborhoods anymore that are hiring private security to do the job of the police. You'll know it's safe when people in the poorest parts of our community have jobs and don't see crime as an alternative. We're so far away from that norm right now that we need to change the way things are. That's the Oakland I plan to get us to, a city that's safe. Thank you.
No applause, please.
Ladies and gentlemen, I don't think we're asking the right questions. Yes, policy and plans matter, but leadership and the ability to execute matter more. I will return to my plan, how I'll fund it, and how you'll measure me, but I'm going to use my time to reframe this discussion around leadership and execution. If I look upset or saddened, it's because I am. Our city is in crisis. City Hall is broken. We've now gone through 4 police chiefs and 3 administrators in 3 years. We celebrate this city as safe, but 100 people still lost their lives here last year. As a brother of a murdered sister, I will tell you that's no reason to jump for joy. City Hall says that we don't have the money or they can't find it to invest in proper safety resources or education. But the money is there. We just don't look for it or spend it wisely. Let's take the $9.1 million that was wasted last month alone. Money that could have been captured with better leadership. Money that could have funded 30 to 40 officers. If you look at $4.5 million settlement that was spent on Occupy Oakland, another $3.5 on a pothole settlement, and $1 million to a consultant, this is money wasted. While our city leaders waste precious resources, our city becomes more unsafe by the day. Our houses are being robbed, and our children are dying. Even odds. That's what San Francisco called the odds for an African American in this city by the time they're 18 to either graduate OUSD high school or be shot. Each time, as an African American, I'm in a room with another African American male friend, I have to step back and say that if I had grown up in this system, one of us would not be there. Even odds are not the kind of odds I want for this city. Even odds, we can do better and we must do better. Capable leadership is how we get to a safe city, and that's what I'll offer as mayor. I look forward to coming back and talking about the plans, the funding, and how you'll measure me.
Please, when you applaud, you take time away from the candidates, so try not to do that. Thank you.
Good evening. My name is Libby Schaff. I was born and raised in Oakland, graduated from Skyline High School, and am the proud mother of 2 young children who are attending the same Oakland public school I attended as a child. I started my career as an attorney, but left that to start a centralized volunteer program for the Oakland Public Schools. I have served as the Chief of Staff to the President of the City Council, Special Assistant to Mayor Jerry Brown, where I was proud to be his point person on violence prevention, was the Director of Public Affairs for the Port of Oakland, and currently serve as a council member here in Oakland. As mayor, I will rebuild our police department and connect it with community while addressing the root causes of crime. I'll increase the number of police and particularly civilian employees. I'll fix our 911 system so that Oaklanders can know that a cop will come when you call. I'll make better use of data and intelligence to stop crime before it happens. And I'll expand successful violence prevention programs like Ceasefire. Finally, I will heal the relationship between the police and our residents while instituting authentic community policing. And we can't have a serious conversation about crime in this city without talking about root causes. We need every child in Oakland to graduate from school with the hope and the skills that they will need to succeed. As mayor, I will focus on reducing our shameful dropout rate and chronic absenteeism. I'll work to forge pathways for our graduates from school to jobs. And I'll work to bring jobs for Oakland's families and ensure that our workers have a decent minimum wage. I'll fund this plan with revenues from economic growth, continuing Measure Y revenues, expanding partnerships, and implementing major cost savings. I am a proud Oaklander, and I reject that crime is some sort of urban tax that you have to pay for living in Oakland.
Hello, everyone. My name is Dan Siegel. I'm really happy to see you all. I want to thank MGO and Make Oakland Better Now. I want to thank all the excellent candidates for mayor for being here. I'd like to thank our hosts. We need a comprehensive plan to address crime. We can't be doing what hasn't worked. We can't just be continuing what's called the school-to-prison pipeline. Very briefly, I have a 3-point plan. First of all, it speaks to decentralizing, reorganizing the police department to put 540 officers on the street in 60 beats to really focus on violent crime, to find out who's committing the crime, and to arrest it. Secondly, we need a police department that serves all people. For 200 years, experts on policing have said that police can be effective only when all people view the police as treating them fairly. We need to not only end the negotiated settlement agreement, we need to end the millions of dollars spent on police abuse cases by simply stopping police abuse. And third, long-term, because the only thing that's really going to work in Oakland is dealing with the conditions that cause crime. Everyone who wants a job should have a job. Every child should have a decent education. We need all sorts of programs, because otherwise we're just going to continue the situation where the prison population has tripled in the last 30 years and we still feel unsafe. I have experience working with police departments. I reorganized the school district police department. I reorganized the housing authority police department, both successfully. I wrote with Wilson Riles the community policing ordinance, which I will implement as mayor. And I led the San Francisco Police Department to satisfy the terms of its consent decree and bring women of people of color into that department.
Good evening. My name is Nancy Sidebotham, and I'm running for mayor because I'm angry. I'm fed up. I want change. I want to see leadership in Oakland that is going to bring change and make the citizens of Oakland proud of the city they live in. I don't want to hear anybody else telling me I'm going to move out of Oakland because it's safer someplace else. Thank you. Because it's safer someplace. Is that better? Yes. Because it's safer someplace else. This is something that has got to stop. Crime in Oakland is not the main issue. Public safety is not the main issue. Quality of life is the main issue. And for that to be handled and dealt with, we need to start looking at what Oakland is made up of, how Oakland has been for the last 45 years, so that we know what the future can look like. We have been a welfare city all this time. We have been handed handouts from the federal government and the state, and we've relied on that. And we need to change that. We cannot continue to build low-income housing in Oakland and expect Oakland to change. We need to bring jobs to Oakland. You cannot bring jobs to Oakland because jobs are not in America anymore. So when you're talking about how you want to bring change and these kids that have no hope, that are going around shooting each other because they have nothing else to do, or walking on the freeway and committing suicide because they have no future, and they'll tell you that they have no future and they leave notes behind saying they have no future, we need to bring change to the city. We have had no leadership in Oakland for the last 4 years, and even beyond that. We have had a machine politic organization running the city for the last 35 years, and that needs to change. And you need to get angry. You need to start asking yourselves, what are we as citizens going to do to make change?
Good evening. I'm a mother, I'm a grandmother, I've raised my family in Oakland, and I want you to know that every violent crime in this city is unacceptable and it's personal to me. When I became mayor, we were at the bottom of the recession, we had the lowest funding for police officers, the state prisons were putting thousands of young men on our streets without support, without education, and we had to move to rebuild the police department. We started by negotiating with the police union to get them to pay for the first time in history into their pensions so I could recall 60 officers. We invested most of the economic growth for the last 3 years into 4 police academies, and tomorrow, 47, the largest class that we can remember, 47 new officers will land on the streets of Oakland. We've hired civilians to get officers from behind desks. We've reorganized the city into 5 areas under 5 captains who are energetic and who are responsible for the neighborhoods they represent. Our department is beginning to change. In the last 4 academies, more than half of the candidates have been minorities or people of color. More women have been hired, and almost half in each class speak a second language. We were able to get federal help with marshals from Washington, and they've helped us take guns off the street and break up some of the most violent gangs. We've been able to implement ceasefire, which has been able to target on the most violent criminals. And so, as a result of that, crime is trending down. It may not be enough, but it's a beginning. More importantly, we're beginning to work with our community and begin to work in relationship, whether it's walking every Friday night, and I invite you to join us with our neighbors or our churches, or working directly with the federal monitor. I'll talk about jobs later.
Hi, I'm Pat McCullough, and one of the things that I want to do is to bring everybody into a feeling that they are going to succeed, that they are going to be safe, and that they are going to be good neighbors to the people around them. This is part of the mayor's job, is to let everybody in the city know that they're a part of it and that their input is important. Now, we've got a lot of youth out there here in the city throughout Oakland, East Oakland, West Oakland, North Oakland, who really don't have any hope. And the problem isn't that the schools are not giving them hope, that the jobs aren't there for them. The problem is that they were never taught by their parents, and this is not being reinforced by the administration of the government, that they have to behave a certain way towards each other. And that's one thing that I know I can do, because I grew up poor. I used to live in the projects for many years. I've also lived in some very wealthy communities for many years. So I understand why people in the hills realize that we can't wait for change to happen in the flatlands in order to make ourselves safe. We have to do something, hiring private police to make ourselves safe. Well, what I want to do is to let them know, and let the people who don't have money to pay for private security know, that it's all our problem, and that we will redirect the police department to not spend so much time dealing with internal affairs issues and protests, because the rest of the citizens in this city are going to take up part of that slack. We aren't going to tolerate riots downtown. We aren't going to tolerate people observing crime and not reporting it to the police when it's necessary to get somebody arrested. Everybody has to be a part of this, and it's going to take somebody like me who knows what it's like on both sides of this issue. So I'm going to have to do some things that people probably haven't wanted to do before. One of these is to go and ask for some parcel tax or other tax revenue to help pay for additional police. So that's it for now. Talk to you later.
Thank you. And thanks to all of you for adhering to the time constraints. The questions now will be posed by the panel. They have decided amongst themselves who will go first. A question will be asked by one person, including follow-up if they feel it's necessary. And I believe the time limit is up to 1.5 minutes for response and 1 minute for follow-up. Is that correct? Fine. Then I'll turn it over to the panel, and one of you may start.
I'll start.
Could you introduce yourself as you start? Thank you.
Sure. I'm
Again.
Matt Arts with the Oakland Tribune. Is that loud enough? Sounds loud. I feel loud. Question is for the city auditor, Courtney Ruby. At a previous debate, when asked about increasing the number of police officers, you said that the city had to stop millions of dollars that we're losing to lost revenue, fraud, waste, abuse, and mismanagement. You said something very similar in your opening statement today. Your office conducts an annual waste, fraud, and abuse audit, and going back to 2010, combined, your audits have identified the recovery of exactly $54,399.51. And last year, your office closed 100 reports submitted to the Waste, Fraud, and Abuse Hotline and substantiated 2 claims. Given that the police budget is over $200 million, how can you really say that there are millions of dollars that can be saved through waste, fraud, and abuse and allocated to the police department?
Thank you, Matthew, for that question. And you're looking at one aspect of the city auditor's program, fraud, waste, and abuse. So our audits, what I had spoke about is the technology audit that was done of the police department. In one audit, we identified $2 million that had never been used or underused. My office returns $6 for every dollar that's spent and identified in future savings, lost revenue, waste, or money due back to the taxpayers. So you have to look at the full of the auditor's office to understand that we are a cost recovery office. And I've looked under the hood of almost every department inside City Hall and found inefficiencies and ineffectiveness that result in there being opportunities for us to save money. What we know about is that 5% of a government's revenue is subjected to fraud. So what it takes is really scrutinizing operations, as I've done, and I created a model auditors organization from an agency that was completely in shambles when I took it over, and now is a nationally recognized office. It's so critical when we look at revenue. This is such an important issue. We know that our kids are dying on the street. Residents don't feel safe. I've had my car broken into twice in the last 3 months. Coming down to City Hall, I have to think about where am I going to park, and what is that response when I walk up to my car. People's homes are being broken into. When we talk about funding, this is a critical issue. Every dollar that we identify will be put towards public safety
Ms. Ruby,
first.
Over here. Thank you for your comments. I think your time is up.
Do I get a follow? Thanks. So in just looking at your audits from this past year, you did an audit of business tax refunds. You said that was fine. You did an audit of Measure Q with the library. You said that was fine. You did an audit on council members interfering with staff. You did have findings, but most of those findings, as far as expenditures, had already been reported. You did a fire audit. You said the fire department failed to recoup $130,000. And you did a workers' comp audit where you said that $10 million was spent over a cap over 6 years. So even if that $10 million shouldn't have been spent, it was spent over 6 years. So in 1 year, in this last year, you identified still that's less than $2 million, and that's less than 1% of the police budget. So I guess, again, just looking at the past year at all the audits, how can you say that there are millions that could be spent on police that are being mismanaged when you haven't identified millions?
Well, we've gone into specific areas, so it comes back to what I've identified is every dollar that we find will be put towards public safety, and that we need those dollars. And in addition to that, we know that there's other funding. When we address public safety, when we make the city safer, then we increase our economic base. So it is you have to, from a management perspective, you have to look at where's the inefficiencies and ineffectiveness. We're a department that's going in and drilling down because I am the watchdog agency. And wherever we go, we find that there's areas for improvement. We don't have the bandwidth to go in and look at everything and uncover every rock. But from a management perspective, when you go in and we look at our operations and we know that we're not doing things efficiently, then we have to identify that there are dollars there that we can put towards public safety, in addition to, like has already been said tonight, Measure Y funding, and that when we make the city safer, we will have a more economic base to fund public safety.
Hi, can you hear me, everyone? Cool. Hi, my name is Bianca Brooks, and I'm representing Youth Radio. This question is for Mayor Kwan. One criticism of your term was the challenging relationship between the city and the Oakland Police Department, which resulted in the resignation of several police chiefs. If reelected, how do you plan to improve the relationship with OPD?
I'm sorry, can somebody repeat that question? I can't.
Bianca, can you pull the microphone a little closer to you?
One criticism of your term was the challenging relationship between the city and the Oakland Police Department, which resulted in the resignation of several police chiefs. If reelected, how do you plan to improve the relationship with OPD?
So basically, how do we improve the relationship with OPD in the community?
Yes.
Yes. Okay. Right. No? Yes. No?
And how do you account for the resignation of the police chiefs?
Okay. Well, I think we're going to finish the hiring of the police chief within a month. I think that we had the board in the middle, unfortunately, and Fred Blackwell and I are committed to do that, first of all. In terms of working, I'm the first mayor to work directly with the federal monitor. And if you actually read the reports, he's actually given us a lot of credit. When I became mayor, there were 22 of the 55 items still to be done, and we're down to maybe a small handful. The number of police shootings, the number of police complaints are down. But I think we have a long way to go. And I think that's why the reorganization of the Bratton report was really important, to get people, police officers particularly, accountable to specific neighborhoods, and to get officers out of their cars to talk to neighbors, to actually smile, interact. That's what we found in all the town hall meetings. We're in the process of a series of town hall meetings now. We're having one in Central Oakland at Fremont High. And we're talking about how do we talk about community policing beyond just the police. How do we work out of schools to make sure kids graduate, that we have more community meetings with the parents groups. We talk about how the police can change their relationships with young people, and particularly talking about how we can make sure that the jobs in East Oakland are the same as the amount of jobs and the unemployment in my zip code, 94611. In East Oakland, the unemployment rate's 35%. In my zip code, it's 4% for young men.
One of the specifically flawed plans of your term was the 100 Blocks program that failed to address which specific 100 blocks, which you said were the most dangerous blocks, that would be covered to improve public safety. Could you account for that program and its flaws?
So I'm sorry, I'm really having a hard time hearing. So it's the 100-block plan?
I think she asked if you could recap the 100-block program. Is that what you asked, Bianca?
Yes. Right.
She just wants you to recap that program and how it's working.
You know, the media really jumped on whether it was 100 blocks or I had used data that Chief Batts had given me at the time. But the bottom line is it's undeniable that there have been neighborhoods in this city that generation after generation have less than 50% graduation rates for African American and Latino boys, and that's why the president has started My Brother's Keeper program, because 50 years after the March of Washington, we're still not seeing equality. There's also undeniable that we have more crime in those neighborhoods, et cetera. So as mayor, I first of all tried to make sure that when we brought on the new police officers, that they went to the neighborhoods where there's more crime. And so that meant that we upped the number of police officers in those neighborhoods. We also tried to increase all the other resources. So whether that was bringing job fairs to the neighborhoods, where it's putting most of the summer job programs in that neighborhood, that's what we did. And what we saw last summer, when I got the jobs up to 1,600 jobs, is that the violence in those neighborhoods did not spike for the first time in almost a decade.
Ms. Schaaf, as you said in your opening, you've been in City Hall for a long time. Yet over the past decade, the city has failed to make sufficient progress on the court-ordered reforms, as you know, under the negotiated settlement agreement. With that in mind, what specific steps would you take as mayor to make sure the department finally gets into compliance?
Getting the Oakland Police Department into compliance is critical, not just to stop the flow of money that we pay for the court monitoring, but because it's the right thing for this community and it will actually make our police department better. And a great example is in the city of Los Angeles, they reduced violent crime by 81% right now from their peak in 1991, and they did that while under a very similar court-ordered consent decree like Oakland's. And that is just proof that getting out of this consent decree and implementing constitutional policing practices is part of actually improving policing. It is part of fighting crime. One of the most important things that we need to do to finalize the completion of the tasks that we still have in front of us is implementing some technology systems that give us early warning systems. This is so critical for our city because not only will it avoid lawsuits and harassment and loss of life, but it will save our city millions of dollars that we could put into other things like public safety. Those are some of the things I believe that we need to do to get ourselves into compliance, implement that early warning system, and be sure to change that culture in the police department. That also starts with effective leadership from the top, as well as hiring new police officers, hopefully Oakland officers, that are part of that culture of respect and are linked with the community.
Speaking of that culture, I'm glad you brought it up. There was a recent survey of police officers that showed that there's a split, apparently within the department, between older police officers who are resistant to change and younger ones who want OPD to become a modern, progressive police force. How can the city effectively deal with this split?
The results from that survey were really disconcerting. It really showed that the officers in the Oakland Police Department feel completely disrespected and unsupported, and they feel like they do not have leadership. That split is telling, but it can be addressed, one, by setting the tone from the top about how this police department is going to function, and that it is going to be a police department that practices authentic community policing. That means getting out of your cars, building relationships, particularly with the greatest gatekeepers in our community that can give access and information to the officers.
Hi, my name is Chip Johnson. Can you guys all hear me? I got a pretty loud voice, so I think it might work. My question is for Mr. Siegel. Mr. Siegel, you were a strong supporter of the Occupy movement. A lot of your supporters in the upcoming election are former Occupy people. Some of those folks have come back here to support you. But the demonstrations in downtown Oakland did a lot of damage to private businesses, merchants, owners, people who had invested a lifetime of work and earnings into building them up. How do you justify your position to the people of the city?
Thanks, Chip. The Occupy movement did a tremendous service to the people of the United States by waking it up, by waking us up to the tremendous disparity of wealth and political power in this country. And for that, I am proud of my association with the Occupy movement. This is not to say... This is not
we're
to
still
say,
timing him, so you take time away from Mr. Siegel when you do that.
Look, the Occupy movement involved people who had excesses. It had people who probably were mentally unstable. It did some damage to downtown. I don't apologize for that. I don't condone it. But the issue for all of us that the Occupy movement surfaced is how can we really make this city a safe city when half of the young people in Oakland do not have jobs, when the high school graduation rate for African Americans and Latinos is barely over 50%. We will continue to have a crime wave in this country that will not stop until we address the issues raised by Occupy. As I said earlier, 3 times as many people in prison as there were 30 years ago, yet we all feel unsafe. In my neighborhood, people have home invasion robberies at their homes. We all need to do something about it.
Well, you're not suggesting that the Occupy demonstrations in downtown Oakland made people feel more safe.
No, they didn't make them more safe, Chip. What they did is they exposed the problems that we have to address. Albert Einstein said long ago that insanity consists of doing the same thing that has failed and expecting a better result. We are not going to arrest and jail our way out of the crime problem. We have to focus on violent crime, and I think that my proposal will do a better job of that than what I've heard anywhere else. But we need to address the roots of crime in our community and make sure that the police department does not contribute to the alienation that many people, particularly young African Americans and Latinos, have from the police.
Again, I'm just going to go down the line. So, Jason, Mr. Anderson, you were involved with the Occupy Oakland movement, far more so than Dan Siegel. And you're also involved with Oakland First Fridays organizing committee. And both of these groups used a consensus model of decision-making that rejected the notion of leaders and sometimes would make it quite difficult to take decisive action. If you were mayor, would you use the same consensus model of decision-making in dealing with public safety issues?
No. What I would do is, it's not just about non-leadership. It's about everybody participating. And that's something that needs to happen on the ground level, and it needs to go in tandem with proper leadership within the city hall. It can't just be one or the other. Consensus-based works very well on the street level when you're doing things at the moment. But when you're making long-term plans, consensus-based models will not work properly. So it has to have a hierarchy. That's one of the things I learned at Occupy Oakland.
No follow.
Okay, this is for Patrick. Being that gun violence is such an important and pressing issue in the city, how do you respond to those who critique your vigilante actions regarding the 15-year-old boy you shot?
Well, thanks for asking that, because first off, I'd like to say that that wasn't a vigilante action, that was a self-defense action. And it's one of these things that I expect people to realize if they really want to look at things accurately. Now, what I would want people to understand is that if they don't do something about this crime problem, you can expect that each one of you will be faced with a life and death situation yourselves. And if you want to just, be a victim or a martyr for the cause of liberalism, then go right ahead and let somebody kill you. But I thought my life was more important than somebody taking it away because they don't like the way I looked at them. So one of the things that I would tell to the youth is that you have to change the way that you're looking at things. You have to stop listening to all the poisonous words that have been coming out telling you to hate the police, hate your elders, hate people in authority, don't pay attention in school. That's the job of the mayor, to set people straight. And that's one of the things that I would do as mayor, is to start at the very bottom when people are just beginning to leave their mother's womb and tell them the way they should behave and know what the consequences are if you don't. Follow up.
Yeah, do you have any particular social programs for youth that you would plan to implement to do that?
Yeah, well, first off, I want to say we have a lot of social programs already. A lot of it is the problem is people wanting to adhere to what the programs are guiding them or should have as a goal to guide them to be and to do. So I'm going to review all the social programs, I'm going to talk to people directly, and I'm going to set myself as an example of how to behave, how to look at the police, and to let them know that, hey, you aren't the only person who used to have a problem with the police. When I was a youth, 14, 15 years old, I was shot at by the police. He shot my friend right next to me as we had just joyrided. That used to be these called when you just get a car and you aren't supposed to be in it. So I understand, I understand what's going on better than I think anybody else who's ever been mayor of this city, and I'm going to bring that to action for the people so they don't get into these problems.
Joe Tooman, this is for you. I'd like you to explain a bit more about what you said in your opening statement. You said that Oakland needs to hire, I think you said 300 more officers, is that correctly? As you know, recruiting, hiring, and training officers is a very expensive proposition. Academies cost about $5 million per. In addition, the city might lose funding for about 60 officers if voters don't reauthorize Measure Y this November. With that in mind, how do you propose paying to hire 300 police officers?
Thanks, Bob. Well, the answer to that question is, in the immediate sense, you're either going to have to make budget choices or you have to put new revenue measures in place. Now, unfortunately, I don't control the fate of Measure Y because I don't sit on the city council and I don't get to put a ballot measure on for free. I'd have to raise money for signature gathering to put a new Measure Y measure or a replacement for Measure Y on the ballot right now. That decision, unfortunately, is in the hands of other people. And by the way, I'll take this moment to urge the mayor and the city council to include all of us as candidates in that decision, because if we all found a ballot measure that we could get behind, that we could live with if we were mayors, we'd all campaign for it and it might pass. And I think it's a mistake to exclude us from that process. But to your question, long term, the way that you pay for this is to use the existing revenue sources that the city has that it doesn't leverage right now. That's sales tax, that means retail. That's new business license tax from attracting new businesses to come here. And for me, that's technology, box retail, grocery stores, and the like. And also, of course, without question, leveraging the costs, not the cost, but leveraging the assets that the city already possesses. That's public land. Now, when I say that, leveraging and monetizing, I know some people said, what does that mean? I mean creating a revenue source from that. Why do we have the Kaiser Convention Center sitting across from the lake with a cyclone fence around it when you could build a hotel there, when you could annex it to the museum, when you could do something that would create a tax base? How much land does this city have that we're not leveraging right now? Before you ask people to pay a parcel tax, you have to leverage your assets, contain your costs, and try and grow your revenues. If people see that you're doing something like that, they'll be willing to pay.
Just a quick follow-up. As you know, one of the reasons that Oakland has fewer officers than other comparable cities nationwide is because Oakland has pretty high salaries compared to cities across the country. The current police officer costs Oakland about $180,000 per officer per year. Do you think that the city needs to work to reduce salaries for new police officers in order to hire more?
You know, the answer to that is that this is the subject of negotiations over contracts. The way that they do that in a union environment, Bob, as you know, is that we have to look at comparables for other cities. And the sad reality in the past has been that union contracts usually ratchet up, they never ratchet down. So it's difficult to say I can just unilaterally slice a salary without the input of the Police Officers Association. In our particular context, we have to be mindful. It's very easy to blame the police for all this, that in the last couple of negotiation cycles, they've actually given up what an arbitrator said they were entitled to, which was a 4% increase. And by the way, their contract is opened next year. We don't even have money budgeted for the raise that they're going to ask for right now. And to ask them to take a pay cut in this environment is only to encourage them to take that early retirement that I warned you about before. So the answer to your question, I know I'm out of time, is it is possible to do that with a third-tier hire for new cadets, but for existing rank and file, it's not going to work right now.
For those of you who came in late, we are not applauding until the end. Thank you. Go ahead, Chip.
I'd like to direct this question to Mr. Parker. Okay, Brian, here's a scenario for you. At a rowdy city council meeting in a town far, far away from here, protesters show up at a council meeting and walk to the speaker's podium with masks covering their faces to address the council, elected officials, and citizens on matters of public policy. Should masked people be allowed to take part in public dialogue, and is it a public safety issue?
Thank you for the question, Chip. It absolutely is a matter of public safety.
Microphone. Pull the microphone closer to you.
Okay. It is a matter of public safety. It's also a matter of decorum. This is a leadership question, and the question is, as mayor, what kind of environment would I produce so that all the city residents could be heard? This is an analogy to Occupy Oakland, and folks probably saw how I wrote on Occupy Oakland. It's pretty clear that in a public place, the Constitution is very clear that people have a right to free speech. That is amongst our most sacred principles. The case law is equally clear that the government has reasonable time, place, and manner restrictions. I would look at the manner restrictions and I would say, if you are closing yourself, if you are hiding yourself with a mask, not only is that not public speech because we don't know who you are, based on past practice and the surroundings that go on, we have a duty to either ask you to remove that mask or ask you to be removed. So as a mayor, I would make sure, because as a matter of principle, I want all citizens to feel that they can come there. I want the elected representatives to feel comfortable in discharging their duties, and so that's how I would come down as mayor.
I have no follow-up.
Okay, I'm going to go out of order because Nancy hasn't gotten a chance to talk. Ms. Sidebotham, last year you worked to defeat the extension of the Oakland Hills wildfire prevention tax. It just so happened that the tax was defeated in what became the year of one of the worst droughts in state history. And so, given that you opposed fire prevention measures for the hills during a horrific drought, how can people trust you to act in the interest of public safety?
The reason I opposed that tax is because it was never spent the way it was supposed to be spent. Audits were never done. And when asked at the city level, because we were told that the auditor's office had done an audit on it, and that audit was not being put out there prior to the vote being taken, that made us question what was being hidden. So when we opposed it, and I was one of the leaders in opposing it, like I opposed A1 for the zoo, I oppose anything when audits aren't done and it's not disclosed to the public what their money's being spent on. When you're talking about leadership, and I will oppose Measure Y to let you know that I will be doing that, because audits are not being done, money is not being spent wisely to protect the city as a whole. When you want to protect the city and you're going to hire your friends at $100,000, if in the case of the Wild Assessment District, someone was going to be hired by $100,000 if it had passed. That was the promise that was made. Those are the things that need to be looked at and questioned. So I will question any dollar being spent in Oakland before I will allow myself to vote for it, and I will let people know to start questioning any dollar that they're being asked to spend. Thank you.
Only follow is, what's the last tax you supported?
I have not supported any tax in Oakland because we have never had any audits done on these taxes. When you look at the money being spent and how it is being pushed around in the Measure Y issue, a lot of nonprofits are not spending their money wisely. It is not helping and benefiting a lot of people. It is benefiting a very few. So when you're talking about if you can prove to me that money is being spent to help and move the city forward, I will back it. But when the zoo is sitting on $34 million and I'm being asked to spend money out of my property, on my property, and spend it on property taxes, I got a problem with that.
This question is for Mr. Tooman. How do you plan to repurpose or address the city's abandoned housing and failing infrastructure problem?
Can you repeat it one more time? A little closer to the mic, please.
How do you plan to repurpose or address the city's abandoned housing and failing infrastructure problem?
Okay, so it's a question about housing, and the last part was?
Failed infrastructure.
It's abandoned houses and failed infrastructure.
Abandoned housing and failed infrastructure.
Right.
Thank you. Well, on the question of abandoned housing and failed infrastructure, we'll start with abandoned housing. The city has eminent domain as one of its tools to deal with housing and also to make sure that we have affordable housing. I'm not a big fan of eminent domain generally because I think there is a potential for abuse, but in the case of abandoned housing, I think this is one of the tools that we would continue to use. To use that land, if you're going to take it over, to create affordable housing opportunities for people who are poor and who might be pushed out by the threat of gentrification, especially in certain parts of our community as we have a migration of new people coming into the city from places like San Francisco where it's too expensive to live. Now, your other question was not about abandoned housing, but infrastructure repair. And look, this is obviously a part of the budget that we have to be very, very careful about. The failure to do this, even putting patch on holes, results, as we've already talked about tonight, in expensive not jury verdicts, and expensive checks that you write to avoid jury verdicts. And frankly, long term, it just contributes to the deterioration of the city. So this has to be a budget priority, but I'm going to be real clear with you. My focus is on public safety. I'm not even going to you can't get to these other issues if the city's not safe. People, middle-class people in the city are not going to continue to live in Oakland and worry about potholes if they don't feel safe. If we don't make this a budget priority and the question that you should be asking in the context of public safety in the debate tonight, none of the rest of this matters, as far as I'm concerned.
Okay, just to follow up, abandoned housing, isn't that often a breeding ground for things like, drug dealers and homeless people, and how is that a separate public safety issue?
Sure. Okay. Now, I don't think you're talking about infrastructure. Maybe I can rephrase what you said. I think you're talking about dealing with blight and trash and garbage. Is that right?
Abandoned housing. Abandoned buildings.
Okay.
Deteriorated housing and infrastructure.
Okay, well, if we're talking about abandoned housing that nobody's living in, right? Then
Yes.
My answer to your question before was to use eminent domain to reclaim that land and then do something different with it, and to mandate the building and construction of something new. Now, if your other question is about people who illegally occupy houses and create drug dens or other things, criminal activity there, or if you're talking about blight generally that makes people in a community feel bad about where they live, this is also a serious problem. I consider that part of a public safety question, and that also has to be a budget priority. If we look for just a moment on the subject, shifting from occupied housing, I'm out of time, ask me again about trash and I'll talk about that. I'm sorry, I'm out of time.
Dan Siegel, this one's for you. Oakland has the highest crime rate in the state and one of the highest crime rates in the nation. Yet, unlike many of your fellow candidates here tonight, you have said that you do not think Oakland needs to hire hundreds of new officers. Why do you think that?
Well, as I've said before, we need what I would call a comprehensive strategy to focus on violent crime, fix the police department so that it treats people fairly, and deal with the conditions that cause crime. Now, in terms of the number of police, I believe that the number of 650 to 700 will actually give us a police department that will be effective in fighting crime if we reorganize and decentralize the department. As I said before, I helped write Oakland's community policing ordinance, and I think we need to go back to it. We can put 9 officers in each of 60 beats around the city. That includes 2 investigators who are beat assigned so that they will focus on getting to know the people in that beat, finding out who's committing crime, and dealing with it. That's 9 per beat. That's 540 officers. If you build a command structure on top of that, including lieutenants, captains, chiefs, and so on, and if at the same time you have some specialized units, we can do it with that number. We also need to look very seriously at all the jobs in the department that can be civilianized, replace officers who are doing civilian work with much lower paid civilian employees, and add officers to the street. I think it's not the question of how many officers we have, but how smartly we use them.
Many research studies have linked crime rates to high rates of income inequality and poverty. In fact, cities with the highest crime rates in the nation, Detroit, St. Louis, New Orleans, Oakland, all have large numbers of people living in poverty. Do you also view crime as a socioeconomic problem? And if so, how would you deal with that in Oakland?
You know, every mayor in Oakland since Lionel Wilson has described him or herself as the education mayor, but not one of them has really made it an effort to partner with the school district to make sure that our children are prepared for gainful employment and productive lives. I want to see Oakland become a place where every 3- and 4-year-old has a quality preschool program, where every middle schooler has an after-school program where he or she can have a safe place to study, recreational activities, and places where their parents are welcome. For those of you who remember your 17th century philosophy, we have to rebuild what is called the social contract so that everyone in our city feels that he or she is welcomed and beloved, respected and supported. That is the way we can build a community that will be a safe community and stop the situation that is just creating crime after crime for decade after decade.
This question is for Ms. Schaff. Ms. Schaff, I had the distinct pleasure of interviewing Richmond Police Chief Magnus last week, and he told me that winning the right in labor negotiations to assign police officers, regardless of to permanent beats, regardless of their seniority, has been a key element in that city's crime reduction. It's also helped tremendously in helping solve crimes. Do you think that those same basic employer rights need to be restored in the labor agreement between the city and the Police Officers Association here in Oakland?
So I think there are a lot of great things that they are doing in Richmond, and hopefully Chief Magnus also told you that I paid him a visit recently myself and spent a day not just talking to him, but as well as Devone Bogan, who runs the Office of Neighborhood Safety, who's doing incredible gang prevention work in the city of Richmond. Again, working conditions with the police department are the subject of negotiations, and I respect that bargaining process. Will I be a hard bargainer at that table? Absolutely. And part of what you seek at a bargaining table is not just economic issues, but also working conditions. And that is having the managerial flexibility to better deploy your officers is definitely something that I would explore in partnership with our officers.
Okay. Just as a basic question, as a basic rule, do you believe the employer should have a right to schedule their workers?
I believe that the City of Oakland has to aggressively pursue all of its rights to best serve its citizens. And I know that a lot of the people I represent have complained about officers changing, particularly these community policing officers. And if we are going to institute real community policing, not just a system where we have 35 problem-solving officers that are supposed to be doing community policing, where the other officers are busy just responding to 911 call after 911 call and don't have the time or bandwidth to get out of their cars and build relationships, we will have to address the scheduling issues, the issues of seniority. But again, I respect the collective bargaining system, but it is something that I would vigorously raise at that bargaining table.
Okay, going back in order, Mr. Tooman. In a debate a couple of weeks ago, you talked about ways to get Oakland's police officers to live in Oakland. Only about 8% of current officers do live in Oakland. And you mentioned a home assistant loans as a tool. And you said, I think you said if an officer would stay in Oakland for 10 years, that the loan would be forgiven. So my question is, considering that Oakland police officers make more than $100,000 a year with overtime, and the average Oakland family makes less than half of that, and considering that Oakland pays for the entire training of its police officers, and considering how hard it is to buy a home in Oakland, how do you justify providing loans for police when there are so many less affluent people who need housing assistance in Oakland?
Start the clock now. You're very ironic, and I appreciate the irony and the point that you're making. But seriously, the object of that proposal, the objective of that proposal is to improve the relationship between police officers who police the street, who, as some of us have said, have strained relations with members of our community, and the police officers you're talking about. Now, the officers that I would propose doing something like that for are new graduates of from our academy. So there's 25-year-olds. They're more than likely not partnered up or married. They don't have children, all of which are considerations, part of the reason that they leave Oakland in the first place and want to live somewhere else. If I gave that person $50,000, let's say, just as I'm not saying that's the number, but I'll just use that for the sake of the hypothetical, as part of a down payment on a home, spread out over 10 years, then we're really talking about giving them $5,000 a year to live in this community. If I go to a third tier hire, which means I've reduced their base when I'm hiring them, I'm taking that savings from what I would give them in their salary, and I'm putting that into a home loan. And my answer to your question is, I do understand that you want to help other people with affordable housing in this city too, but the advantage of encouraging police officers financially to live in Oakland is that you improve the relationship. That person is no longer a uniform or a badge or a gun or a billy club. They're a neighbor. They're somebody that you see at a neighborhood baseball game or someone that you see at the grocery store. The reason we have a bad relationship with the police department in certain parts of the city is that we mostly see them as people who live somewhere else and who work here. The object of this program, Matthew, is to encourage them to live in this community and be part of the community.
I'll do follow. You say you want to hire 300 more police officers?
Yeah.
How much will that cost?
Well, if the average cost of a police officer is believed to be $180,000, all in, benefits, and the rest of it, that's over $50 million.
And the academies?
The academies are roughly $4 million each to do. And so what is your question?
How much?
How much what?
How much will it cost?
The academies are $4 million each.
How many academies will that take?
Well, if you're getting 55, it's claimed to be 55. I think it's probably, you graduate a little bit less than that. But if you're doing about 55 academies each, we're talking about 6 or 7 more academies theoretically. But the truth is, if I'm going to get any efficiency out of those academies, I also have to deal with the attrition at the other end, which is the existing officers who are retiring right now or leaving or dying or leaving for other reasons at an alarmingly high rate. So one of the ways that I can have a lesser number of academies, to your question, is to improve my efficiency at keeping officers who are retiring here and working for us for a few more years, and that would mean that I need less academies than I suggested to you.
It's a quarter of the operating budget, I think.
I beg your pardon?
I think that's about a quarter of the operating budget for the city.
Well, no, it's 67%, I think, right now, police and fire together, of the general fund, right?
This question is directed toward Mr. Anderson. You stated in an interview you plan to address the war on drugs and how it has plagued the city. What is your plan to tackle that issue, given that people have tried for decades and have yet to see some success?
Thank you. I'm glad I have an actual question. The war on drugs is part of a long-term COINTELPRO project, as we know, and that project is coming to an end because people that have sold drugs or are selling drugs realize that's not the career path they really want in life. It's very clear that these are part of an overall economic problem that's been plaguing the city for years. Now, from my perspective, a lot of that doesn't make sense because we're a poor city, and without us, the Bay Area would not have the resources that it has. We bring in millions of dollars, but there is no tax for the poor. There's no business tax, and correct me if I'm wrong, but there is no business tax. So that means that the city of Oakland is getting robbed by the poor by not allowing them to actually gain resources from the business that we bring into this area. Part of the reason for that is because they have an economic plan to push black and long-term residents out. My family came out here in the Great Migration in 1945. My grandmother was a nurse, and my grandfather was a machinist. He was in the union also. And I have a lot of family members that were part of city government. So the war on drugs has been a part of my life and a direct result of a lot of the problems that I've had in my family. Luckily, none of us have gone to jail, but at the same time, we've dealt with the poverty that comes along with it and the mental illness that comes along with dealing with neighborhoods that have drug problems. My plan will be having a comprehensive citizens review board and a comprehensive plan to actually educate the people about what drugs are and have plans for rehab centers and diversionary programs so when people come out of jail, the 9 people that get out of jail every day have a place to go and actually learn and improve themselves.
Thank you, Mr. Anderson. Your time
from the prison
has
industrial
expired.
complex.
Thank you.
No follow-up.
Gene Kwan, this one's for you. Over the past decade, Oakland police have had one of the worst records in the state for solving crimes. OPD, in fact, typically solves fewer than 30% of the homicides in the city each year. And that was even true when Oakland had more than 800 officers. Last fall, OPD admitted that it had not yet tested evidence in more than 650 homicide cases dating back for many years. Nonetheless, during your tenure as mayor, OPD has prioritized other initiatives rather than investigations. Why?
Well, first of all, I want to say that the solve rate's gone up a lot in the last year, and it's several reasons. One is that, quite frankly, the community is cooperating more. Many times, when I first became mayor, when particularly baby Lawrence was killed the first year I was mayor, we were out in the community, we were talking to people. People actually came forward and said, we know who the shooter is. They weren't willing to testify. What we were able to do with getting the help from the federal agents and picking up the whole gang and also offering witness protection, we started to get people who actually said, yes, we'll testify, we'll move on that. I think that the help recently with the Laisha Carrington, the same thing. We knew, although we could not say to the media, the day after she was shot, that she was shot because her father had killed somebody in Berkeley. And that people told us. And that was a real change. What the police department has been able to do is develop some relationships with the community and some sense that we will prosecute and that we had the help to prosecute, that they've been more willing to come forward on murders. So that's a big part of it, getting more community collaboration, getting the help from the federal government that I was able to get from the White House and from Eric Holder, so that people are not fearful when they come forward and help us make these arrests.
But over the years, OPD really has concentrated on this issue of getting witnesses to identify perpetrators or to get suspects to confess, and has not emphasized DNA evidence and other types of forensic evidence. And they still aren't doing that under your tenure. Do you plan to change that?
I think what's happening with community policing, and let's use an example of the data we're pulling up now for racial profiling, that we're getting better data so that we can look at the performance of officers. I can hold those captains accountable. If someone comes to me and says they didn't even come and ask us about the shooting, or they didn't come and answer in a robbery in Berkeley, I can literally now go exactly to the captain, exactly to the time, who was on duty, who should have been in that neighborhood, and who should have responded. So the reorganization under Bratton makes a real difference. And then pulling together the data as we have. And you know, I'm not happy with the data, but it took us 3 years to pull together good data on racial profiling. So now we can actually look at which officers are the so-called frequent flyers, and maybe there's a reason. Maybe they're on the drug detail and they make a lot more stops and a lot more arrests. But we have a rational basis to look at it and a fair basis to see whether or not we're treating our community fair. It's really clear that we're stopping still too many African Americans.
This message is for Ms. this question is for Ms. Sidebotham, sorry. Ms. Sidebotham, under the NSA, at different times, the Oakland Police Department has had more veteran investigators assigned to its Internal Affairs Division than it has to its Homicide Division. I checked the numbers today because I wanted to make sure. There are 14 Internal Affairs investigators assigned in the police department, and there are 12 homicide investigators. Do you think that's the right balance? And if you were mayor, what would you do, and how would you go about changing that?
No, I don't think it's the right balance. And the first thing I would do by changing is making sure that we comply with the NSA and get the police department out from under Judge Henderson so that we can have a police department that represents Oakland and a police chief that has the power to oversee the rank and file that right now has no leadership. And as mayor, I would not try to micromanage the police department because I'm not trained in that area of expertise. And that is part of the problem with OPD today. But I think that we need more investigators, and I think that once we get it set up that we comply with the NSA, that we can move those inspectors out of the internal affairs and move them out to the streets so they can start doing the job that they were hired to do. Because I'm sure a lot of them do not like being in that position. But because of where the city is and because we aren't complying with what's required, we're in a problem situation.
Just one follow-up. Given that the city is still under the NSA and there are reforms left to be done, would you have a plan? How would you convince, persuade, deal with the Federal Monitor to fix this situation?
Well, the question I have is, what is the Federal Monitor doing and why aren't we complying? I mean, that's the question I have. If we're paying this person $1 million, why haven't we complied? So the question is, why isn't the administration of this city demanding answers from these people that are supposedly overseeing this? Why are we stagnating?
Mr. Parker, the police department accounts for about 42% of Oakland's operational budget. For every dollar the city spends on police salaries, it spends more than 30 cents to fund pensions. And even though times are good and revenues are way up, the city still can't afford more than 700 police officers if it can get there. Given that the police union's contract expires in 2015, should the city demand that police either take a pay cut or pay more into their pensions to help the city better staff the department? And I would mention that the fire union does pay, I think, 4% more than the police union toward their pensions.
Thanks for the question, Matt. So when we're talking about the question of pensions, I think we've got to separate out exactly what we're talking about. So we're talking about money that's owed, that's on our balance sheet, and we're talking about how fast that money is going up, meaning the officers that are in the system. So if what the question asked is asking them to pay more, that's like focusing on the tail part of the dog. The great majority of the pension issue is from retired officers and for officers that are already in the system and have been for some time. The simple fact is that our expenses, including unfunded pension liability and health care, are rising at a more rapid rate than our revenues. We have to grow. This is not a question about cutting our way out of this. If you look at the estimates, they go from $1 billion to $1.5 billion in terms of these two numbers combined, the unfunded pensions and liabilities. This is a structural issue. It is very clear that if we go on our current rate, that will be a structural deficit in the next 2 years. The way that we get out of that is by growing revenue and by going aggressively after the money that's already owed and thinking about creative solutions for taking that money down. In terms of the officers, I would expect to treat all employees the same. And as a mayor, I would not wait till I'm right on top of the negotiations to try to extract stuff from people. I would do it well before and make sure that we're working as partners.
Okay, quick follow. One way to more efficiently manage the police department is through technology to offset the fact that there just aren't that many officers. Can you name 3 technology systems that you think would be essential to better police Oakland that the city doesn't have currently?
Yeah, so what's the role of technology? And so I didn't get a chance to go through my plan up front, and I would have 800 officers, a focus on community policing, cleaner neighborhoods, and ridding the blight and the graffiti that goes on, and long-term investing in our education and jobs. I think we've got to think about that as a full answer to the crime problem. In terms of the answer to your question, I'm sorry. Would you state it one more time, Matt?
3 technology systems that you think could help Oakland better police itself.
And I've been on record of saying that I would use technology as a force multiplier. I still think we need to get to 800 officers. ShotSpotter obviously is already there. There's a company called Predpol, which is predictive analytics, and so those are 2 examples of the technology. But again, I want to make the point that this isn't about choosing the right technology. We make decisions on technology all the time. Courtney said in her report, we have technology that's sitting there and it's on the shelf. It's a matter of using that technology and making sure that we're implementing it and we're using it to solve crime and giving the information to officers versus letting stuff and data sit on the shelf.
This is directed toward Libby. In an interview, you said, "I believe Oaklanders deserve to have a police force that responds quickly when they call for help." And you also said, "I will have a relentless focus on having a city that is safe." In a survey, says confidence in public officials to solve the issue of public safety is low, with 50% distrusting the mayor and 45% distrusting the city council. How do you plan on making Oakland safe by restoring trust in the mayor's office?
We do have a crisis of confidence in our government. And one of the places that I've been very passionate in throughout my career is creating more transparency in government. When people can see what their leaders are doing, they will have more understanding of it and more trust in the integrity of their leaders. I have put forward more legislation in the last 3 years to build transparency into our government. For the first time, we've had our budget put out in open data source, where there now is a website where you can look at visual representations of the city's budget and dig down into the details in a way that citizens have never been able to before. My legislation has enabled you to find out everything you want to know about who is giving all of us money. And different journalists have taken that information and built charts and analysis. So when you open up, lift the veil off of government, that really builds trust. I'm also part of a national network of leaders in using civic technology. And technology gives us a new tool to reach out and engage the public in decision-making for their government in ways they've never been able to before. People who have not traditionally had the ability to get down to that city council meeting and stand in front of the cameras for 2 minutes now have abilities to text in. More people can text now than have a landline. And so there are new ways to engage our community so they have real participation and transparency. That is how we are going to build trust.
No follow-up.
Ms. Ruby, over the past decade, the City of Oakland has paid out more than $60 million in legal settlements related to police misconduct, including the $4.5 million recent payout to Iraq War vet Scott Olson. As mayor, what steps would you take to address police misconduct and reduce the accompanying burden to city taxpayers?
Thank you. It goes back to leadership. When we look at the ability to attract a police chief and to be able to have a police force that's properly trained, when we are paying out that kind of liability and we know that we're at a deficit of approximately 200 officers at least, and we could use these funds to put police officers on the street, but instead, because we don't have officers that are properly trained, and what I know is that the department's starting to get traction in this area. So the monitor who was brought on, who now is the compliance director and or the previous compliance director, Frazier, really started to train the officers on use of force. Like finally somebody came along and said, what is occurring in your police department is not okay. It was an outsider, and we had to pay thousands of dollars for their advice. But the good news is what I'm hearing from the police officers, it's effective training. There is no harder job than being a police officer in Oakland. And what we know is we need to make sure that our police officers are properly trained and that they have the leadership so that when they go out there, they are both saving residents' lives, keeping their lives protected, and making sure that our streets are safe.
Just a quick follow-up on that. So one of the ways that the city has tried to address the use of force by police officers is by spending a lot of money on chest-mounted cameras the police officers are supposed to wear during all interactions with the public, except they're not wearing them. What would you do as mayor to ensure that the officers use these cameras?
Yeah, it's unacceptable. This is what, the Chip, I think when you talked to the police chief, said that he didn't have his camera on. I was absolutely appalled when I saw this in writing. You are the leader of the police department, and you're telling me you don't have your camera on? That we know that this protects both the police officer, it protects the citizens, it goes back to data. We have to know. If you don't trust yourself to do the right thing with the citizens, then you shouldn't be a part of the police force. This is a part where, and you certainly shouldn't be leading it. Like, we have to be ensure that we are setting leadership policies to ensure that we are being leaders, to understand that our workforce knows what to do, and that we're leading by example.
This question is for Ms. Kwan. Ms. Mayor, since you were elected, you've implemented a 100 blocks plan. You have, and later Operation Ceasefire. Both of these plans offer alternative approaches to prosecution and incarceration. Countless times, you referred to your activist history as the foundation for some of the decisions you've made. Has that background helped or hindered your efforts to initiate crime reduction strategies here in Oakland?
Well, I want to thank you for that column on ceasefire the other day.
No problem.
I think bringing down crime takes a lot of different strategies. I tried to lay that out in my opening statement, that we had to have more police, and we have to have more police that understand our community. And so I'm very proud of the reforms I've made in the hiring so that the police department, the new officers, more reflect our city. And the way I would have answered the earlier question is, quite frankly, I don't think it's just housing incentives. I think we have to grow our own cops. And a lot of you know that we're piloting a program with the school district, with some high school academies, to try to get kids into internships this summer as explorers, and then grow them in cadets in a partnership with Merritt College. And if I could get enough kids in that pipeline, we would make it a requirement, quite frankly, to be an Oakland police officer, that you had to come through that pipeline at Merritt College, so that people would be trained in Oakland and would be at least familiar with Oakland, if not from our schools and from our community. So changing the kind of police officers and changing their relationship with the community is absolutely fundamental. Intervening with the most violent people, because we're going to have problems of getting up the budget, and it costs us about $37 million more a year to get up to 900 officers. We're going to have problems getting up to that, because our latest polls say you're not going to pay any more, so I have to grow the economy. I literally have to get halfway through my new 10K program and get enough property taxes to get up to enough money so we could afford 900 officers. But using our police officers smartly and focusing on the most violent criminals is absolutely important. And then lastly, the partnership to give young people real hope, and that is supporting the schools. I'm asking city employees to volunteer in the schools and trying to organize the NCPCs to collaborate with the schools.
Just one follow-up question. I know that you guys are now trying to implement these programs at Merritt College and others, but a lot of cities, in Northern California, all over the place, use Explorer programs. And Oakland had one, but no longer does. What happened?
I'm sorry, the Explorer program?
The Explorer programs, yeah.
Yeah, we actually do, but it's not very broad. And that's why this summer I'm getting special funding just to expand the Explorer. So last summer we had about 20 Explorers. And we also have some programs for the PAL program, where we brought some kids in. I think it has to be more targeted. That's why I really want it combined with the school to career academies, because these are kids who have interest in law and justice to begin with, and not just random kids we're bringing in during the summer. And when I was on the school board, we really worked very hard on making sure that kids through the school academies were getting internships where they might really be able to continue to work for us.
Councilmember Schaaf, last month the City Council debated something called the Domain Awareness Center, which is an intelligence center and an enhanced emergency operations hub that also has surveillance capabilities. At the port, at least, camera feeds, surveillance camera feeds would be fed into the center, which has all sorts of TV monitors that would be monitored by police, per se. Privacy advocates were very concerned about it. And when it came time to vote, top police and fire officials told the council that it was very important to integrate the city's computer-aided dispatch system for police and fire into this intelligence center. And you opposed it on privacy grounds. You said that the information in the dispatch system, quote, could have victims' names on it. It could have all sorts of information that is outside the realm of the Port of Oakland. And when the chief of police, Sean Wendt, got up and said that the information in the dispatch system is really just a chronological account of an incident, and that officers responding to emergencies need as much information as they can get, you still opposed it outside the port. You said you asked if the dispatch system could be filtered by zip code so that it would only function where the port is. Can you explain why you ignored the advice of the police chief and top fire officials, and in that case, and sided with privacy advocates and the ACLU?
So I believe that we can better utilize technology to fight crime without invading privacy or violating civil rights. That is a position that I constantly raise throughout the debate about the Domain Awareness Center.
Oh, good. Thanks for having such a short answer to such a long question.
I mean, I can talk more about it, but that.
Well, I can just do a follow.
I mean, you know, and you've watched my career. I have been a fierce advocate for public safety and trying to bring tools to help our police department do a better job. But this is a standard that I have, and at the very first meeting where this came, I wrote the motion that required that the city adopt a privacy policy and data retention policy. And 7 months later, the administration had failed to do that. And so when that vote, we had several rounds of votes on this, when it came in front of us, and there was a complete failure to deliver something that other cities have in place to make sure that our citizens are protected. They did not deliver that, and that is how I voted. I believe that we have many other opportunities to use technology, and don't forget, the most important intelligence is human intelligence, and if we destroy the trust that our community has in our city, we will destroy our ability to get community intelligence, and that is going to be most useful in fighting crime.
Okay, I have a follow. The East Bay Express had a story recently about Stingray devices that track specific people through their cell phones. And I believe I'm quoting the story correctly here. It said that the police department credited at least 59 arrests from 2007 through 2009 to these Stingrays. Privacy advocates.
I'm sorry, Stingrays?
Stingrays. It was in the East Bay Express about a month ago. Stingrays. These are devices that, I guess, mimic cell phone towers and allow police to track specific people through their cell phones. And police have used this since 2007, and they credited for 59 arrests over, I guess, a 3-year period. I'm not aware of any privacy policy when it comes to Stingrays, certainly not a council-approved privacy policy. That article also said the city was working to purchase another Stingray. Would you oppose any use of these Stingrays, considering there's no council-approved privacy policy, even though the police department has credited them for 59 arrests?
So the City of Oakland is continuing to do work to develop a privacy policy and data retention policy. We have none right now, and I know, for example, we have years of license plate reader data that anyone can get access to at any time. Most cities would not retain that data for so many years for so many innocent people that are not under any suspicion. Matt, I will be honest with you, I'm not familiar with the Stingray. It is not something that has come to the City Council, so I reserve the ability to research that particular issue and take a position once I've done
that. This question is for Mr. Parker. 82% of polled voters agree that the strained relationship between police officers and many Oakland residents gets in the way of fighting crime. What will you do as mayor to improve community, particularly communities of people of color, and police relations?
So I think what we have is a tale of two cities right now. We have people in the hills that feel different than people in the flatlands. When I go out, and I've walked every district in this city, and I talk to our residents, they share with me that they don't feel safe, nor do they trust the police. And I think that this is a historic thing. If you go back to the 70s, when we had the Black Panthers and we had the police, you had two groups that were supposed to be working together that were afraid of one another. So what I would do is speak to the issue. I think that we have to take race on in a straightforward and an honest way, much like Chip did in a column here recently, and speak to the power of inclusivity, speak to the power of folks being allowed at the conversation. I knocked on my first door last weekend, and I had a young man surprised. I was running for mayor, and I'm knocking on the door, and they said, usually politicians don't come around here. They don't care about us. I think that that attitude is pervasive, and it speaks to the underlying tension in this city. We've got to stop it. I'll speak to it directly. In a community policing, I would go through and make sure that we have a healing. And it's not just about the police. It is making sure that we have sensitivity training when police come on, but it's also a matter of making sure that the community knows proper ways to work with police. Community policing is an early warning system. Community policing stops crime, and community policing solves crime. We have to come together and show all the residents of the city that they matter and they have a voice.
No follow-ups.
Nancy Sidebotham. In recent years, OPD, as you know, has concentrated resources in the highest crime areas of the city and left the hills and other neighborhoods where there is less crime mostly unattended. Do you think that was a smart move, or would you push to redeploy the department so that every neighborhood in the city gets the same amount of police service, and why?
I think based on the number of police officers that we have, I think we need to use them efficiently, and deploying them into areas where crime is more blatant. I think the visibility attempts to keep crime under control. Doesn't necessarily work all the time. The criminals, unfortunately, know how to use cell phones and be aware when officers show up. The unfortunate thing is that crime in Oakland has spread out, and the hills, who have never really had to deal with this in the past, in the format that they're dealing with it now, have come under attack, and they in turn have turned around to private patrols in order to protect themselves. But OPD needs to be available through their problem-solving officers, working with the Neighborhood Services Department so that they work with their NCPCs, which is the Neighborhood Crime Prevention Councils, and form neighborhood watches. So it's a collaborative effort of bringing people together to work with OPD based on the fact that OPD has such a small number of police officers in order to deal with 400,000 citizens in the city of Oakland.
No follow-up.
My question is for Mr. Anderson. Sheg, what is your real name?
My real name is Jason Anderson.
Jason. I don't think I've ever known it, but thank you.
My friends call me Shake, though.
Okay. You know, that's a great name, by the way. You know, I've watched you go nose to nose a couple of years ago with Oakland's former police chief, Howard Jordan, outside of Acts Full Gospel. You remember that?
Yes.
It was over the officer-involved shooting death of Alan Bluefield. Bluford, I'm sorry. If you were elected mayor of the city, would you have to change that approach towards the police? And if so, how would you change it? How would you reconcile that relationship?
Well, the first thing I would do is hire a competent police chief. That would be a top priority. The first thing I would do is do whatever I need to do with my team and my advisors and the brilliant people that I surround myself with to find someone that can actually serve the city of Oakland and align themselves with the platform that I have. Secondly, what I would do is the same thing that unfortunately I had to do in South Africa, truth and reconciliation. We have to actually get down to the brass tacks that the people of Oakland are afraid of the OPD, and the OPD is afraid of the people of Oakland. We have to find a way to create middle ground so both of these, the community, and that's the greater community of Oakland, not just the people that live in poor conditions, the community of Oakland and the OPD have a common ground where they can talk amongst each other. My job as mayor would be to be the liaison between that. The reason why I feel I'm responsible and capable to do that is because I was in the military. I'm not afraid of uniforms. I have friends that still wear uniforms. I have friends that still operate as base police and have dealt with the high-level stress situations. So the OPD could be my friend. I could see myself developing strong relationships. I could see myself developing strong relationships with capable men that want to do their job and serve the community well. I believe that a lot of OPD officers would love to live in the city they work in. I mean, who wouldn't? Who wouldn't want to not have a commute? The reason why they leave is because they feel like their car might get broken into, or they feel afraid. So that's what I would do. I would do truth and reconciliation and community democracy.
Thanks, Mr. Anderson. I have no follow-up.
Okay, this is for Dan Siegel. Mr. Siegel, you've campaigned on holding police officers accountable for inappropriate actions. According to the city attorney's office, of the last 13 police discipline hearings that went to arbitration, the city prevailed outright in only 3 of those cases. How can you, as mayor, hold police accountable and weed out the bad apples when the city is losing a majority of discipline cases against police officers?
Well, I guess we need not only a new chief, but some new lawyers. We need a chief, a strong chief. I don't believe that Oakland has had a strong police chief since Joe Samuels was here. Joe Samuels was a cop's cop. He held the officers accountable. He had their trust. He provided leadership. That's step one. The officers have to understand what the rules are. I believe that's why they're so disillusioned. On the one hand, people are telling them to act in a certain way. On another hand, they're being asked to act in another way. Secondly, we need civilian oversight over police discipline. We need a civilian commission that will have staff to investigate complaints of police violence. And thirdly, yes, we do need attorneys who will win these arbitration cases. I've read some of the arbitration decisions. They seem absurd. Just as in one case, the city council voted to pay the punitive damages assessed against an officer who strip searched a young man in the middle of the street on Martin Luther King Way. When the city council does that, it seems to me that they're saying, well, what you did was okay. We have to put a stop to that. In Richmond, which people are talking about, they've only had like 2 shootings in the last year. They have officers who are from the city. In Jackson, Mississippi, which is half the size of Oakland, they have created a situation where officers look like the city, live in the city, and have very few cases of police abuse. We have to follow those models.
Very quick follow. Police officers have said that they feel like Internal Affairs unfairly prosecutes them in discipline cases, and the union says that. In a recent survey, many officers said that too. Does the fact that the city is losing so many of these discipline cases make you question whether the Internal Affairs system is unfair to police and whether concerns about abuse might not be quite as bad as otherwise thought?
The fact that we have had $74 million paid in lawsuits against Oakland in the last 10 years and at the same time have failed to meet the standards of the negotiated settlement agreement, which in my opinion is the greatest possible indictment you could have against elected and appointed city staff, proves that we are not dealing with this problem correctly. I think it changes with the wind, and that cases are brought arbitrarily in some situations and ineffectively in others. We have to solve that problem.
Okay, this question is for Nancy. It's no mystery to anybody that lives in the city that Oakland has a very bad homeless problem. So how would you deal with protecting and helping the city's homeless to improve this problem?
Could you repeat the question? I lost one of the words there.
The question is, how will you deal with protecting and helping the city's homeless?
I think that has to do with communities coming together. We've had in the past nonprofits that have worked collaboratively with Alameda County and the City of Oakland and gotten housing, former hotels on San Pablo Avenue, on Washington. The community supported and still supports, especially after the earthquake. A lot of nonprofits in the community came together to bring homeless into housing and the affordability of it. So I think that if we can continue to work with the nonprofits to continue to build and bring the homeless into wanting to come inside instead of living in tents along freeways and under freeway overpasses, that's something we need to continue to do.
No follow-up.
Brian Parker, you touched on this a bit in the previous answer, but I wanted to go a little further and talk about a recent report that came out from the Oakland Police Department that showed that police are stopping and searching African Americans at disproportionate rates, and 62% of stops involve blacks, even though they make up 28% of the city's population. In addition, blacks are far more likely to be searched, even though the searches prove to be unwarranted 3/4 of the time. Some people have argued that OPD is justified in stopping African Americans more often because the department is concentrating on certain areas of the city. Do you agree with that sentiment? Why or why not?
Yeah, disturbing statistics, first of all. But I think we got to look deeper, and I don't think that this is about institutional racism. To me, it goes back to the previous question of poverty and looking at where classes of people are that are committing crimes. So, as an African American, I have been stopped while driving while black, and I think that that's a thing that is shared and an experience that's shared by many in this city. But I think that we've got to hold that to the side. What I am more concerned about is the fact that there are 80%, 90% if you add in Hispanics, that are involved in, as the defendants, in crimes of robbery, in violence, and other things. We have to correlate this with the number of people that are living in poverty. At least 30% in our city. The previous question that Nancy was addressing was about the homeless. We don't have places for people to go. We are undereducating people, and we don't have an inclusive education system. For years, we have not had economic development and opportunities that are available to all. I wrote an op-ed that says, look, we've got this category of things that we could do in the short term, but long term, we never get out of this problem if we don't look at the systemic cause and give some people hope back. So we have a class of folks that are poor. And are they reaching out to get food, to have a place to sleep? Are they reaching out to get food, to have a place to eat? Yes. And I think that the answer is, rather than focus on locking them up, let's focus on some of the root causes.
Okay, I have a quick follow-up. You said you don't think that there's institutional racism going on, but Oakland's Cannabis Regulatory Commission, yeah, we do have a commission called the Cannabis Regulatory Commission, put out a report last year that reported that nearly 90% of the people who were arrested for marijuana possession or sale in Oakland were black or Latino. However, nationwide, rates are whites actually use marijuana at much higher rates than blacks and Latinos nationwide. So if there's not institutional racism, why are we arresting 90% of the black and Latinos for pot?
Yeah, well, I think you go back again to how people are making the money. You made the observation in your question. You talked about marijuana uses versus selling. A lot of people are in those crimes are using marijuana to make money. I think that we need to, and this goes to Ceasefire and the other programs that are focused on folks that are engaged in killing. I think that if we can give people an alternative to do, they won't be in the drugs. We won't have such problems with Ceasefire. But I want to make a point. I don't believe, and as mayor of this city, I want to make it clear that I would have sensitivity, that we would focus on bad conditions like the riders, but we have too many people watching our officers. We have internal affairs, we have cameras, we have watchers watching the watched. What we need to do is have sensitivity training, make sure that they know that they have a mayor that's going to stand behind them, get out from under this federal monitorship, which, if the district judge won't allow us, we should have the courage of our convictions to go to the appeals judge, take control of our own police force so that we can put our own DNA and run the city. That's what leadership is.
It's up to me. This message is for, or this message. I think I'm on the phone. This is a question for Joe Tooman. Mr. Tooman, you've emphasized the dire need for more police officers on the streets of Oakland as one of the city's highest priorities. But other than tonight's introduction, you said very little about youth prevention and outreach programs that are being used effectively in quite a number of cities. Would those be in your toolbox? And what kind of measurable outcomes would you need to see to keep them in your mayoral toolbox?
Well, thanks for the question, Chip. So outcome-based management is a principle in business that works also in policy for government. It means that you identify the outcome that you're looking for, and then if you're funding a program that's supposedly going to create that you evaluate the success or the efficiency of that program by looking to see if it reached the outcome that you asked for. So, for example, if I'm dealing with funding a program, let's say in East Oakland that's dealing with reentry felons, and we're going to have a fair number of them now being released back into the county, and I'm funding a program that's trying to teach them job training skills or job interview skills so I can get them employed so that they don't recidivize, get arrested, and go back to prison. The goal is to get them employed. The city in the past has written contracts that I've looked at in the Measure Y program that called for contract deliverables. A contract deliverable in one case called for the teaching of the writing of 40 resumes. I think it was about that number for 40 felons. Who cares about 40 resumes? The outcome that you're looking for is whether or not that person could take that resume and whether or not the mayor, showing some leadership, had gone to the different chambers of commerce and found some jobs, and whether that person could interview for that job, get employed, and have a meaningful alternative to being tempted to go back to drug dealing or something else that would give them some money when they didn't have any money. Outcome-based management says you identify the outcome you want, and then you monitor the program you're paying for to make sure you get the outcome that's desirable. We haven't done that in the past. That's sloppy leadership, and if we do that effectively, then this can be one more tool. I'm not saying it'll solve all the problems, but this can be one more tool that deals with those issues.
Just one follow-up. Using the model that you just presented, have you had a chance to look at the things that Oakland is doing right now and whether or not those outcomes justify the expenditures that are being made?
You know, I want to, in answering that, I don't have 60 seconds. I want to identify Rashida Grenache, I think, who's here. I worked with her group, Pueblo. We had a group called Adults in the Room in this last couple of years. We looked at a number of Measure Y programs, a significant number of them. And we were quite chagrined to find that the outcomes weren't always identified, that the things that were being done, in good faith by the vendors, by the way, were just what the contracts called for, but there were a significant number of those programs that we were funding that weren't about actually showing a reduction in violence or violent crime. The external auditor for the city, who was hired by the city, told me behind closed doors, by the way, that if you're looking for Measure Y programs to be the absolute solution for solving violent crime, don't look for it here. And these programs haven't. There are some programs that are okay, but overall, crime's not better. It hasn't improved. The problem is arguably worse today.
Thank you.
Mayor Kwan, there were about 12,000 more major crimes reported in the first 3 years of your tenure as mayor than in the final 3 years of Ron Dellum's time in office, about 93,800 to about 81,200. That's a 15% increase. The biggest increases were burglaries and robberies. Without talking about your current crime-fighting initiatives, can you explain the sharp jump in crime that coincided with your taking office as mayor?
Actually, I think it started in the Dellums era, but the highest era was the last year of Jerry Brown's administration. So you have to look at the 10-year trend. So if you want to look at, since I've been in public life, it was I would actually look at the 20-year trend. When Dan and I were on the school board in the middle of the crack epidemic, crime rates were at probably the highest for the nation and the highest for Oakland. So you got to look at the long-term trend. I'm not going to argue one year or the other year. We clearly know that there were some phenomena, particularly last year with the cell phone epidemic. We realized that as we took down some of the more violent gangs in the city, that suddenly robberies started to decline, and particularly cell phone robberies. And it's why this week we got out of the Senate committee the bill to put the kill switch in cell phones, because a lot of urban areas across the country, robberies went up 25-30%. In San Francisco and Oakland, about three-quarters of all the robberies involve a cell phone. So robberies are definitely up. Some people think that there's no correlation between recession, unemployment, and crime. I don't think it's a total story, but it's certainly part of it. I also think having the lowest number of police officers, as I said, when I came into office, we had the lowest number of budgeted police officers, is one of the reasons I worked so hard to get the numbers up. That there's a clear correlation that you have to do both the prevention, but you also have to have a minimum number of police, and you have to have them deployed effectively.
I know the 100 Blocks plan has been brought up a couple times, but I just want to bring it up one more time. If your aim, when you started the 100 Blocks plan, you said repeatedly that 90% of homicides and shootings occurred in 100 city blocks, and the Urban Strategies Council did the math, and it turned out that only 20% of homicides and shootings had occurred within Oakland's 100 most violent blocks, and 90% of Oakland's shootings and homicides did not occur in 100 blocks, but in 1,303 blocks, which is about 20% of the city. Given that, how can residents trust you to deal with crime when it appeared that you didn't really have a grasp on how dispersed violent crime was in the city as mayor?
Okay, so first I learned one thing: never take a data point from a chief without checking it yourself. And Chief Batts actually used that figure many times. I just repeated it, and then I think the Chronicle pointed that out. And then when we did our own research, if you talk to the researchers, they're saying about 66% of the murders take place in those neighborhoods, right? And we used it just more as a target, because I wanted to see which of the neighborhoods should I adopt personally as a mayor, that I walk those neighborhoods all the time, should knock on the doors. Which of those neighborhoods should we concentrate some of the resources, like the summer job program? I've made sure that since I've been mayor that 50% of the jobs go into those neighborhoods with the highest concentration of violence, dropout rates, and homicides. So I don't apologize for doing that, because I think that that's made a difference. That's partly what's brought down particularly violence during the summer. And the reality is that some people have distorted that to say, oh, we only put resources into the flats. We basically have, using CompStat, we have the police follow where the crimes are. So if there's a crime epidemic in the hills, the cops will go up there. We follow where the violence and the crimes are.
This question is for Mr. Siegel. I just wanted to know how you plan on dealing with the city's problem with gang injunctions.
I think that one of the problems that exists between the community and the police department, particularly young people, is when we adopt measures that are based upon racial assumptions. It's called racial profiling. I oppose the gang injunctions. In fact, my law office took the lead in stopping the effort to expand gang injunctions across the city because they didn't work. They didn't work. The research showed they didn't work. And what they did is that they stigmatized young people from a particular racial group and further alienated those young people from the police department. That's the opposite approach. And I think that the column that Chip Johnson wrote the other day defending the 62% of police stops and searches directed at African Americans sent exactly the wrong message to our community. When we want to think about solutions to crime, we shouldn't think about people's races. We should think about their unemployment levels, about their failure to graduate from high school, about the denial of abilities. If we start thinking about crime in that way, we can target those young people who need our help. And they don't need gang injunctions or curfews. They need a job. The best solution for the crime problem is a jobs program, and a jobs program that pays a minimum of $15 an hour.
All right, just a quick follow-up. So how do you plan to deal specifically with Oakland's issue as far as gangs go?
Okay. Again, you know, the gang problem is a more serious problem than we can address in a 90-second response. What we need to do is focus on people who commit violent crimes. Whether someone's uncle or cousin or next-door neighbor was associated with someone else who was in a gang is not as relevant as to whether there is someone on that block who's got an automatic weapon, who is using it to rob people, terrorize people, and shoot people. The focus should be there, not on groups.
Mr. McCullough, I think there's a general consensus in Oakland that the city is awash in weapons. There's a lot of guns in the city. In recent months, many neighborhood groups have been hiring security patrol guards to patrol their neighborhoods, some of whom are armed. Do you think that's a good idea? Why or why not?
So you're talking to me? Yeah, of course it's responsible for whoever these security officers are, if they have a license, if they've had training, and if there's been adequate association with the people who are hiring them, telling them what they want done to carry firearms. Now, of course, if they have a contract with somebody and they're saying, well, we don't want you to carry it, then you don't carry it. But I think it's kind of foolish for people to be in a situation where they think they're going to encounter somebody who may be armed and committing a crime to go at them with just a flower and say, please stop. You've got to be able to protect yourself. It's the number one thing. And you might it be necessary for you to protect other people that you encounter while fulfilling that contract. Ideally, we would have police doing all this, but right now we don't. So until we have enough officers on the street to deal with those violent criminals, to deal with the problems that you're going to have with people having guns running around, you've got to at least be able to allow the security officers to protect themselves.
No follow-up, thanks.
I'm still here. This message is for Ms. Ruby. I'm going to place you for a moment. We're going to jump ahead to, what's next year, 2015. You're the mayor, okay? It's now your responsibility to maintain the integrity of the police services, provide protection for Oakland citizens. You need a permanent police chief. You're going to have to meet the financial and policy wishes of a federal monitor, okay? And you're going to have to come up with funding to hire as many as 900 police officers. Where do you start? And what's your top priority?
My top priority would be to hire a police chief that has the qualifications. And when I look at it right now, Chip, we are in a public safety crisis. We are looking for a police chief while we have a very unstable environment. And we need to be able to attract the absolute best police chief to come on board. And we know they're out there. But Oakland's not looking very attractive right now. And I put that on us as leadership because we had an opportunity in 2010. We had a police chief of the highest caliber, and we lost him. So where would we be today? Because in 5 years, we could have shifted OPD. We wouldn't even be having this forum tonight about public safety because we would be in a different place. So it starts with hiring a phenomenal police chief and then looking at how do we inspire and really bring the tools to the rank and file. What we know is that policing today, contemporary policing, is different than it used to be 10, 15, 20 years ago. We're talking about collaborative policing. So these officers, they need to get out of the car. It's not just about lip service. It's about the fact that we're going to train you how to be a community police officer. We're going to evaluate you on that, and we're going to promote you based on that. And what we know from the data is that police officers are more satisfied, the community's more satisfied, and you see a turn of events occur.
Just one follow to that. Clearly, you thought you are referring to Anthony Batts, right?
Say that. Yes.
You're referring to the former police chief,
yes,
Anthony
I am.
Batts. Well, clearly you were against his leaving, and my question is, do you agree with the reasons that he gave when he left?
Do I agree with the reasons?
Do you remember the reasons that he gave when he left?
I remember some of them, and I remember what. Go ahead, please.
One of them was that he had all the accountability but little control. Do you agree with that assessment?
Absolutely. All you had to do was watch a city council meeting to know that the police chief was being micromanaged. We hired an expert to come in and actually, if you look at the strategic plan that Anthony Batts put out and you compare it to now, we paid $250,000 for a strategic report to have, there's very similar things in those reports, right? Why did we have to pay that money? Did we have to save face? Because we lost a police chief, we couldn't keep one, so now we had to go back because we don't have credibility with the community. We're going to get a consulting report that's going to tell us again how to keep you safe. We still don't have a leader, but we're going to do that. So I think absolutely that that's unacceptable. You know, when I hire professionals, I make sure that I let them do their job. And I make sure that they have the tools to do that, and I hold them accountable if they don't do their job.
Thank you.
Patrick McCullough. You're a municipal worker, you live in North Oakland, middle-class neighborhood. What makes you think that you are especially qualified to make Oakland a safer place, especially considering all the challenges that Chip laid out in his last question? Or at least what makes you think you're more qualified than a sitting mayor, a council member, a lawyer who sued the police department many times, healthcare executive, chief accountant, a man named Shake? And why do you think that why do you think you're going to do a better job?
Why me? Well, because I've been living throughout these expanse of life. You know, I've been poor. I've been living around rich people. I've been seeing rich people. I've been seeing poor people. I've been seeing the homeless. I've had to deal with them all. And I've also been dealing with the police and with criminals throughout my life. At times, I've been one of the people that people have been running from. I remember having to go into court. I was busy up working up all night. I finally finished my paperwork at 5 o'clock in the morning, and I ran to court in the same dirty sweats I had on the day before. And you should have seen the people move. Okay, so I understand. I've been beat up by 3 thugs. I've had to act in self-defense and defend myself. And I understand why other people who aren't defending themselves, you know, why they're afraid to do it. Maybe they're incapable of doing it, but I understand all that. And I understand why the people who are being targeted need to be treated fairly. And I know how to do it, and I just don't see it happening any other way.
One more. The ACLU last year urged Oakland to limit the role of police officers in and around school sites after a study showed that black male students were far more likely to be arrested than their non-black peers. Given that data, do you think police should be less active at school sites?
No. I think that it's very important for the police to engage the students at these schools. And I also think it's really important for the city of Oakland to not just do what the ACLU tells them to do, or for that matter, the National Lawyers Guild. You know, when I was in law school, I was a president of the chapter for 2 years. So, you know, and when I was a teenager, I was what they called a very militant young man. So I don't think that any of these people own what this whole field of being righteous with people. So I'm somebody who's come from the people who want to be looked down upon. Okay, I understand what that's like. And I know it's very important to have the police engage the youth when they're very young, to make them feel safe, and to show them that, hey, you can do what I've done. You can move up from being somebody who looks like they're about to be a criminal to somebody who looks like they're going out to save somebody. And that's what I want to be able to do as mayor. Thanks.
All right, this last question is for Courtney Ruby. I just want to know what social programs you particularly support that involve improving public safety and protecting youth in particular.
Thank you. The programs that I support right now, so it goes back to our public safety strategies and what is providing value and where we have the dollars. So we have limited dollars and we have to use them wisely. The programs that we're seeing success in right now is the reentry and the crisis intervention. So we are going actually providing services for them to deal with that. In addition, the reentry services that we're providing for employment, I think it's very critical that it has to be an integrated approach where we are impacting a reduction in violence. When the strategies were looked at from measure-wise perspective and OFC-wise, what OFCY could do, the DHS, the Department of Human Services, directed things to OFCY after-school programs, and then they used the funding in Measure Y to directly impact a reduction in crime. We have limited dollars. We have to ensure that we are using those dollars to bring violence down and then putting it in the right place in the city and then having the metrics to tell you all, the citizens, are these dollars working? And if they're not working, then we need to reevaluate the program.
No follow-ups.
Mr. Anderson, lots of research shows that young people are more likely to turn to crime if they drop out of school. And in Oakland, young African American men have astronomically high dropout rates from school. What would you do as mayor to help Oakland Unified improve its dropout rate?
Thank you. I wasn't a good student. I really just thought a lot. I really was in my own mind. I'm an only child, so I had a lot of time to myself. So my learning curve was me learning on my own. And a lot of times we don't evaluate children properly when it comes to their skill sets and their intellect. The kids these days are much smarter and much more capable than we believe. And the reason why they drop out is not because they're stupid, it's because they're smart. They actually see the system has failed and they actually feel they could do something better on their own time. I mean, you can learn everything you want to online. If you have internet access and YouTube, you can be a genius. It's that society. We've made it. We've made it to the fact that we can educate ourselves to the point where you are confident in your own intelligence. I would like to develop programs, secondary educational programs, so when children become 18, they can actually learn skills and trades that apply to actual reality, not just pumping their head full of knowledge that isn't relevant to their everyday life. It's insulting for someone to have to learn something that they can't apply. That was my problem with school. It wasn't that I wasn't smart. It was that I can't apply this. This doesn't work in my everyday life. So we need to have programs like learning about solar energy. These are programs that will apply to their everyday life. Learning about coding, computer programming. These are programs that apply to their everyday life. Building programs, actually taking kids out of the city and taking them to campgrounds and wilderness so they can learn how survival skills. These are the things that are necessary to apply to so that when the children grow up, they actually feel like a relevant part of society instead of outcasts.
Just a quick follow-up. And so as young people become older and they try to find jobs, they can't find any in Oakland. Oakland has still a very high unemployment rate, one of the highest in the nation. Do you believe the city's crime problems are related to the lack of jobs?
Definitely. I think also, go ahead.
And what can you do about it?
I think we should leverage what we already have. We have several churches, several nonprofits. As a matter of fact, the Bay Area is one of the top places for nonprofits. There are so many nonprofits, but have you heard of them? How many times have you used a nonprofit? How many nonprofits have you gone to that have given you help directly? I'm a promoter. I've come from a lot of different disciplines, and promoting and marketing is one of them. And I have yet to see anything directly to the public from a nonprofit that actually help the community directly. This is a problem. So therefore, we can't keep feeding the trough and not giving it down to the community and still collecting money. A lot of people are making money from the nonprofit industrial complex, and I think the only way you're going to change things is to actually make them, hold them accountable as a city to actually deliver those resources to the community, churches included. This is a crisis. We have a crisis in the city, and it's not because of money, in my opinion. It's because of the same people sitting at the top, holding on to the money, looking at their bank account and smiling while other people are starving.
Okay, this is my last question, and it's for Mr. McCullough. Patrick?
Yes, sir.
Okay. You've talked a bit about what you'd like to do and also a little bit about your own background. And I want to ask you something. How would you go about persuading, convincing kids with backgrounds much like your own, sometimes militant, sometimes maybe skirting the law, to
That's it?
how do you further that dialogue? Yes, that's my question.
Well, for one, I think I'd be absolutely perfect at doing this because I had to go through that same transition when I was growing up. I saw policemen. I didn't really have the same feeling that a lot of the kids in Oakland do now, that I'm, if you listen to a lot of the people speaking, afraid of them. But I didn't understand them. I thought that maybe they might be from a different community. But when I started seeing a lot of officers who looked like me, of course I had my parents who also told me that these officers are here for you. I can do that same thing with the kids we got here in Oakland. And that's one of the things that hasn't happened before. Nobody said that, you know, I understand how it is to be hungry. I understand why you want to go and steal, why you want to go and do things that people say not to do. And I can show them why it's so important to change from that feeling of just rejecting it all and coming to the point of how can my life be different in the future? What can I do that's going to make my family better off? What can I do that's going to make my society better off? And that's something that hasn't ever happened during the time I've been in Oakland. I also, as I say, came from a radical background when I was a youth. And so I hear people invoke the Black Panther Party's history a lot, but they don't bring up the fact that the Panthers were mostly involved with changing the political process and the political situation that they were in, keeping them oppressed. I can bring all that together for the people and show them that I did it, and this is how you can do it.
Just one last question. What would you tell the young teenagers you're talking to about the decision you made to use a gun?
Oh.
To solve an issue?
Sure, I can tell them that it was an absolutely life and death situation, and that if you were involved in this situation, what you need to do as a younger person, because I want to bring back to the point that I was a fully functioning adult when this happened. You know, I'm a Navy veteran. I'm not some kid who doesn't know what the consequences are, who doesn't know what can happen. So my situation is different from a youth in the street with a gun. First place, youth should not have any guns. They have no legal right to own one. So every youth in the city must give up the gun. That's all there is to it. And I will make sure that it happens no matter what it takes to happen. Now, a lot of times I hear when somebody's been hurt and particularly when they've been chased by the police and found to have a gun. This happened a couple of times. One of the most tragic things I've heard living in Oakland is from a father who said he doesn't believe his son had the gun, and then the mother chimed in, but if he had it, he needed it to protect himself. It's the police's job to protect the youth. And that's what I'm going to make sure that the police do. I'm going to make sure the youth know that, and they're going to come to the police when they have a problem involving violence. Thanks.
Thank you. I think the panel has completed its questions. We do have another small portion of the program where the candidates will be allowed to ask one other candidate a question with a 1-minute response. And then at the very end, there will be a 1-minute closing by each candidate. What I'd like to do is to share with the audience how long 30 seconds is. So why don't y'all stand and stretch? 30 seconds. Can you time us? And don't leave the room. You've all been very good tonight.
I don't joke with my guess is right outside the doors. I'm just guessing. Can you goodbye?
I see some of you leaving.
It went well.
It ain't over yet.
Hey, Ernst, how are you? What's going on, man?
All right, so if you're through stretching, are we almost up? Okay, so if you'll sit back down and then put your hands together and thank the panel for asking great questions. And then when you're all done with that, I want you to thank the candidates for answering those questions. Okay, so this part of the program should be fun, I hope. And I would caution the candidates to try to choose someone different than whoever went ahead of you. It may be tough, but I know you can do it. So let's start on stage left, audience right, with Patrick McCullough, and allow him to ask a question, and it must be succinct and quick.
My question is to Mrs. Siegel. I appreciate the work you do trying to help people left out of the whole picture, but have you thought about what it would take? I understand that you don't want to have an increase in the number of police officers from what we have now. Have you thought about perhaps sending some of your Occupy people out to East Oakland to try to keep the crime down?
Well, Patrick, that's kind of a silly question. I will say, though, that part of an idea of really doing community policing that's effective is to have neighborhood patrols that are made up of neighborhood residents who are organized and trained and who interact with the people in their communities for neighborhood safety. And I have said that we can increase the size of the department to somewhere between 650 and 700. That's not a magic number, but I think it will work, and it's something we can afford within the city's budget.
Thank you, Mr. Siegel. No follow-up. After the program, you can ask a follow-up. Ms. Kwan.
This is hard. I thought we were going to ask everybody, but who should I ask? Joe, before you became a candidate for mayor, how many neighborhood crime prevention council meetings did you go to, and which neighborhoods? And how many ride-alongs did you do, and which neighborhoods?
Prior to 2010, I probably attended 2 NCPC meetings. I hadn't done this.
And in response to your concern about not asking a lot of questions, we're running out of time, so it really has to be one question per. Ms. Sidebottom?
The question I have is why, to Ms.
Get the
Kwan,
microphone closer, and who are you addressing the question to?
To Ms. Kwan, why is it that we are hiring a police chief now prior to getting through the NSA's issues?
First of all, this chief has probably gotten more kudos from the Federal Monitor and the Compliance Office before. He was head of IA and internal investigations at one time. He was considered very fair and very tough and was not very popular with the police union, needless to say. But his performance since then, if you read the report since he's been mayor, since he's been chief, he's done remarkably good job getting this down to really maybe only 3 items left right now. I had wanted to finish this, and we would have finished it before December if our headhunter had not quit. And I believe that the Federal Monitor and I both believe that the sooner we have a permanent chief, the sooner we can finish these last items. And so Fred Blackwell and I are adamant about getting through with the current headhunter to do the research and to hire somebody within the month.
Mr. Siegel?
Thank you. My question's for Brian. Brian, how many police officers do you think we need in Oakland, and why do you think that increase will make a difference?
Thank you for the question, Dan. I think we need 800, as I stated before. I think it'll make the difference because right now we have 20% of our precincts that aren't being covered. I also think that it is the way that you deploy them. As I stated before, many parts of this city don't feel that they are engaged with their police. I think under my plan, I would put the police into the communities. I would make sure that they were on bikes, walking around on foot, engaging in the community. Attention.
My question is for Mr. McCullough. Mr. McCullough, what do you think we can do to improve community policing and really realize its potential for Oakland?
Well, number one, I would bring the police closer to the community by, again, like some of the cars, have them going to the schools, going to where people eat. And one of the things that's really important, and I do this without having a lot of money coming from our treasury, is to encourage the officers to live in Oakland. It's very important that they understand the community and are comfortable in the community, not only when they're working, but when they're at leisure. Have the police officers show up at the parks, perhaps bring over some water to the guys playing basketball and just leave. So a lot of little things that the officers can do that won't be confrontational. They only have to get off and make themselves miss calls by walking too far away from the cars. But a lot of little things that the officers can do will go a long way to making them understand the community and have the community feel close to them. Thank you.
My question will be for the mayor. I want to talk about the turnover in the city, and you answered in regards to somebody's question about a police chief. You assure the citizens that you will pick somebody that actually sticks around?
I actually think I've picked really good city administrators. You know, I think that Lamont Ewell was able to get, in a very tough time, all the unions to agree to not only two-tier on the pensions, but to give us 9% or 8-9% back for 2 years so that we wouldn't have to do more massive layoffs. I think Deanna Santana, although not necessarily always popular, worked really hard, got us through the dissolving of redevelopment. We didn't miss a beat, and Fred Blackwell, we were able to get 3 massive economic projects on their way. The Army base had been stalled for over a decade. Together with Fred, I was able to get a Chinese developer into Brooklyn Basin, and Lastly, you know, I wish to look at San Francisco Foundation. I'm not really that happy, but the fact that Henry Gardner is willing to come back, who's considered one of the best city managers in the country, and I'll answer the chief one later since I'm out of time.
Mr. Toomey, I'm sorry, Brian, that was your question, Mr. Toomey.
So is it to me?
Yes.
Okay. I'm sorry the mayor's getting all these questions, but she's in charge, so that's the person I wanted to ask. Here's the question. Mayor Kwan, a few weeks ago in your State of the City address, you reported a budget surplus and suggested that revenue growth was positive for the future and that we've turned a corner. Careful analysis of the budget you reported, however, suggested that there is no budget surplus, that those dollars are already spent in the first year, this year, of a contract that you gave to different contracts you gave to different labor groups, and that next year, in 2015, there is no money currently budgeted for those raises for those same groups. Why did you report a surplus if there is no surplus?
Well, I think I said, and if I misspoke, and I apologize, I said that this year we had an excess of what we projected of $18 million. We also, and I didn't go into the fine print, but it is actually in one of our written versions, that we also overspent about, the city council overspent about $8 million. And so we'd have a remainder of about $10 million that we could apply to next year. We still haven't gotten the third quarterly report. It looks like it's going to be further ahead if the sales go through that I expect to go through at the end of this year. And real estate, the real estate market's really hot. Most of the extra money is coming from real estate transfer tax because the city is really hot, that people are finally building in buildings that were approved many years ago, that were about to have major sales in several areas, including spaces for new hotels, et cetera. And so I expect the revenues to be up. Now, do we have a long-term problem? Somebody used the statistic that we have a $1.6 billion deficit. That represents about 20% of our pension, and 80% funding is considered really good. So when we're going to talk about these numbers, we have to talk about them in context.
Mr. Anderson?
Yes. First, I'd like to say thank everybody for being here. This has been a great turnout, and I'm really happy to be here to represent the city of Oakland. I love.
Question in there?
Yes,
for
of
somebody?
course I do.
Maybe you could have a question for me.
This is to Brian Parker. This is a very simple question. Does the Port of Oakland pay business tax to the city of Oakland?
So the simple answer is no. There's revenue sharing that goes on. There was a parking settlement last year. Just take you through how things go super quick. We have the airport. Most of the revenues are captive there. We have real estate, and then we have maritime, which is governed by the State Trust Act. And most of the revenues are regulated that way. I think that the question that you should be asking is how should we be viewing the port? And the port is, as a department of the city, could be one of the major economic drivers of this city. I think we've started to turn a corner, and if you look at my jobs plan, you want to talk about metrics, you want to talk about getting people back to work, let's talk about a 20K plan and getting 20,000 people back to work. The port powers 80,000 direct and indirect jobs. Over the next 4 to 6 years, if we could grow 20%, that would add 16,000 jobs, and jobs at every single level. And if anybody here doesn't think that adding 16,000 jobs in this economy would transform our landscape, just look at other cities that have done this. That number of jobs would take us down below the national employment rate, and we would see a market decline in our safety statistics.
Thank you. We're almost there. Ms. Ruby?
Jason, may I call you Sheikh?
Yes, you can.
Sheikh, can you tell me what do you feel most optimistic about Oakland's future?
Well, deep down, I'm an artist, and I really believe that it's been a very wonderful turnover in the art scene and the music scene of the city of Oakland. It draws the economy, it draws creatives, it gives the city a lot of hope. Things on the ground level, you need to feel inspired. One of the campaign slogans I have is quality, not quantity. That's not just with the OPD, but with the city of Oakland. We need to be proud of our city. This is a very wonderful city. We live in the best place on the planet, in my opinion, which is California. And I think that it's inspiring to see these young artists, and I was not inspired by how the city rolled back on First Friday and acquiesced to the Fox Theater to have it go down 19th. I feel that if we want a vibrant city with creatives, if we want a vibrant city that attracts people, we need to attract and support the art scene completely and totally. And with the adventation of Latham Square gives us the primary spot to end First Friday, and I think we should continue to extend First Friday all the way down to 19th, where Latham Square is, so we can celebrate together as a city.
I think we can applaud all of those answers. And I think whoever wins the mayor's race will be succinct and on time, because we've done a good job here tonight. We are going to close out our evening with a 1-minute closing comment from each panel member. And since we started here with questions, we'll start on the far end with Ms. Ruby for a 1-minute closing. And thank you.
Thank you. I want to first express my appreciation to Make Oakland Better Now and the Metropolitan Greater Oakland Democratic Club. I also want to thank you for your participation this evening and for the panelists' service tonight, and also my colleagues. I'm very optimistic. Oaklanders have the energy and the talent to solve the public safety challenges ahead of us. There will be hard work, it will take time, but we will find the money. As city auditor, I've seen this city get into trouble by not looking at the numbers. As mayor, I will make sure that the city gets out of trouble by dealing with the facts. As I was preparing for tonight's public safety forum over the past several months, I had stacks and stacks of documents and public safety plans and notes in my home office. And my 6-year-old son said to me, "Mama, Oakland's really going to like your homework." So I know he's an easy vote to earn, but I'd be honored to have your vote.
Thank you. Mr. Anderson?
Yes, once again, thank you. I'm from Oakland, California. My family's from Oakland, California. And, last year we did a campaign to save a National Historic Landmark. It was Liberty Hall. Some people have heard about it. It was a project that we worked as a community, and we did everything we could, and we saved that from Citibank foreclosure. I spent 9 months of my life almost dedicated to saving this building, and it was done. So I feel like this next 9 months will be dedicated to saving the city of Oakland. So this is an important thing for me because my legacy and my family are attached to this. The Anderson name is part of Oakland. Do your research. In Occupy, the crime dropped 19%. And that's because people were taking care of people. And I think that's the model that we should have when we deal with the city of Oakland, is taking care of people. Confidence has no budget. So it's not about money for me. It's about being confident and displaying the image of confidence to the city and the rest of the world. Oakland is not a charity case. It doesn't need sympathy. It needs support, but it needs love from the people of Oakland. And that's why I would like for you to support me as mayor of Oakland.
Thank you, Mr. Anderson. Mr. Tooman?
Well, I want to echo what Courtney said about thanking our panelists and NGO and Mobin as well. And I also want to say thank you to the people at Temple Sinai for giving us this beautiful venue to speak tonight, and all of you for being so patient to sit so many hours of this. Your interest in this issue, public safety, is, I think, exemplary of what I hear every day when I walk in the city going door to door canvassing. It's the first thing that everybody in every part of the city talks about, and it's a grave concern for all of us. What I want you to know about me is you leave this debate tonight and think about all of us, but what you think about me is that I will be singularly focused on public safety, staffing up to the correct numbers for the police department over a number of years. It's not going to happen all at once. We have budgetary issues we're going to have to deal with. I'm also focused on budget development, attracting new businesses to here in the sectors that I mentioned, hotels, technology, and retail. And that finally, I want to have those here because they create job opportunities, which helps us to address poverty, but also because they throw off revenue at the city, so we're not a city that's always in budget deficits. Thank you for your time tonight, and again,
Thank you,
thanks for being here.
Mr. Tooman. Mr. Parker?
Phil Matera interviewed me for over an hour and at the end, he asked me, are you sure you want this job? Canvassing, I told them that I'm running for mayor of Oakland. And they said, really? Gave them my card. Said, you can call me? Yeah, you can call me. And I said, look, if the city could do one thing for you, what would that be? And they looked up, and one had a small baby with her and said, I'd like a GED and a job. I went back to my car and sent Phil a note, and I said, not only do I want to do this job, I must. This fierce urgency of now and the failure to act among the least of us is going to continue contributing to our problems. We need a leader and a mayor that sees it as a moral imperative that every citizen and every resident in this city feels safe, whether they're at home, walking about, or in their homes. I am about big change marked by a 50% drop in murder and a 25% drop in robberies and innovation, leadership and execution. I hope you would choose to vote for me for your next mayor.
Thank you, Mr. Parker. Ms. Schaaf?
Thanks so much for staying and sticking it out tonight. My name is Libby Schaaf, and I have been serving Oakland my entire life. I'm made in Oakland. I was raised by a family that had me out working in every part of this city, every community, since I was a young child. And long before I got into a career of public service, I've served on so many nonprofits. I've served on 14 different nonprofit boards. But in my career, I have been one of those people that has really taken on and solved complex problems, and I've done that through collaboration. It is time for Oakland, if we are going to achieve that promise of being the fantastic city that we all know that we can be, that we have to move past the politics of either or. We have to move towards both and we can be a city that rebuilds our police department, connects it with community, and addresses those root causes of crime. I'm very passionate about giving every citizen in Oakland the safety they deserve.
Thank you. Mr. Siegel?
Thanks. I'll stand up also. I want to thank everyone for coming out tonight, even our guests from the East Coast. You know, I'm running for mayor of Oakland because I love this city and I love everyone who lives here, especially our young people. I've lived in East Oakland since 1975 and on 64th Avenue since 1977. I sent my two sons to the Oakland schools and Berkeley schools. Both of them became public school teachers in Oakland. I run a business in downtown Oakland. We employ 14 people, 14 good-paying jobs. And I'm probably the only candidate up here who's actually run a police department. And I ran a police department for 3 years, and we did not have one complaint of police officer abuse. You've heard about my ideas tonight for running the city. I've told you a little bit about my experience, and I have the skills that I believe will make me a mayor that you will all be proud of. And what we can do is unite our community, improve our public schools, create jobs for people, and make this a safe city for everyone. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Sidebottom?
My name is Nancy Sidebotham, and I'm running for mayor because I believe in Oakland. I have a passion for Oakland. I have a passion for the people in Oakland, and I work with my neighbors and my community. And I think that all of us together can bring change to Oakland, whoever is mayor, because we believe. That's why we're here. That's why all of you are here, is because you care. And without the caring and the love that we have for this city, Oakland will fail, and we need to turn that around. We have, again, as I said in the beginning, children that have no hope. We need to bring hope back into their lives. We need to bring hope back to Oakland, and we need to fight to make this city the viable city that it should be. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Kwan?
I've been fighting for the kids in this city for about 24 years. I want to get back to the issue of jobs. I believe that jobs will stop bullets. I think by growing the mayor's summer job program last year and putting the Peace in the Parks program, we changed what happened and we helped bring a decrease in homicides. Not enough, but a beginning. In the state of the city, I said that 50 years after the March on Washington, it's not okay that the unemployment is 3 and 4 times higher in East Oakland than in the rest of the country. And that by starting these major new projects, whether it's the 50% hire at the Oakland Army Base and the port extension, or whether it's the 25% apprenticeship hours at Brooklyn Basin, we have an opportunity to give thousands of young people in this city real hopes, real jobs. And this is something that I've been working on, I've been successful in doing, and I hope that you'll join us this summer to make sure that at least 2,000 kids get jobs, because this is a once-in-a-generation opportunity to break that cycle of poverty and really realize a real hope for all of our kids. Thank you.
Thank you. And Mr. McCullough, you get the last minute.
Thanks. Hi, I moved to Oakland in August of '94, and I immediately became involved in public safety because the car parked in front of my house where I had just finished working on got shot with about 4 or 5 bullets from .45. That was the first week I moved into Oakland. So I'm no Johnny-come-lately to public safety. I've been involved in it intimately for a long time. And I know it's one of the things that is keeping Oakland in the news. What I want and what I can bring to Oakland is that we've overcome that. We've done healing. We've brought people together who were in divergent camps. And you can see this on the stage. All these people up here want Oakland to be better. I may disagree with the way they wanted to do it, but I also know that they have good hearts. They want it to happen. But I know how to make it happen, how to get to the people who have been touched before, and how to bring the jobs, the security, and the good outlook to these people who have been left behind for so long. They've heard all the stuff before. Elect me and the problems will be over.
Thank you, Mr. McCullough. As the moderator, I would also like to thank the audience. You've been really quite good about following my requests. And I want to thank the panel of media. And I want to thank all the candidates. Go forth and vote. Meeting is adjourned.
Nice to see you.
I'm in the fire. Thank you very much.
We all have good luck.
Thank you.